morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second day of EU LISA annual conference. This is the Innovation Day. Everything that I said yesterday morning stands also for today. This is about the recordings, about the streaming, about taking photos. But there is one additional thing that I kindly remind you, and namely, you will find, or you actually have found probably, in the folders, the evaluation forms. Although they might sound really very prehistoric because they are hard copy forms, we really appreciate if you fill them in and hand them in for the Secretariat. If you have lost them or you don't know where they are, then the Secretariat will provide you with some additional copies. And of course, if you really are in a hurry, then there is also the online version, but please be so kind and provide us also your feedback. This is very relevant. Thank you and have a very nice day, and I do pass the floor over to those who really do the work.
So welcome in this second Innovation Day. I'm not really the one that will do the work, but our speakers here. That is good for me. Our session today is dedicated to mobile technologies and how they can drive efficiencies on the ground, with people working really on operations. Before starting our sessions and before presenting you the speakers here, I would like to make a point starting from yesterday's discussion and somehow to put the scope to really put the limits of today's discussion of this interesting session that you will hear. So yesterday we saw a video presented by the Minister of Interior of Estonia, where he showed some very nice pictures of policemen working on the street for typical police checks, using, smart devices and tablets, etc. And I noticed something that normally we do not notice such details in such a video because we focus on the message. So what I noticed was the policeman getting off his motorbike and start playing, navigating in his smart tablet with his huge gloves that normally policemen are wearing on the motorbike. And I thought how easy or difficult it is to really navigate in such a screen with these huge gloves. If we need to have specific devices for that purpose with certain sensitivity, what happens if it starts raining and the policeman needs indeed to use such device on the street for doing his checks? Will this device work, or we need to develop certain infrastructure to handle such conditions? So all these questions are really relevant for today's discussion. Yesterday we heard Stefan asking, is it really business that we should focus, or is the technology the driver? So yesterday indeed we focused on the business. Today we have to focus on both and maybe give some emphasis on technology and how it can enable or really limit our opportunities working on the ground. So, I would like now to present you our speakers. Let me have some help because it's difficult to pronounce all the names. Frank Smith, it's the easy name of the panel. So, Frank was a member of the management board of EU LISA, and he's the chair of the ELNET's mobile initiative, driving cooperation between the member states on all these interesting aspects that we will hear today. And he works in close cooperation with Sarah Jorstmarker. Sorry if I didn't pronounce it well. Sarah is manager of the mobile initiative and member of the Swedish police. And she will present directly after Frank, so we will have no interruption because based on Frank's framework and discussion, she will give practical examples on how all these things work on the ground and what has been done there by the Swedish police. We have also Axel Gerlich. So I had an issue. I asked yesterday Axel how I should pronounce his name with these two dots. He said, do whatever, just don't tell me garlic. So Axel Gerlich. Axel is a senior sales engineer from Crossmatch, and he has been driving, he was the head of the cross-border pilot in Crossmatch. So he will give us the perspective of the industry that we are very keen to hear. And last but not least, we have João Fernandes, Head of Information and Communication Technology Unit in EASO. Joao will give us some interesting perspective on what he has seen in the hotspots on the ground and how technology can help. So I pass the floor to Frank. I have these nice cards to tell you if you are out of time. If I am kind, I show you this side, that is 3 minutes. If I am even kinder, I show you the 4 minutes. I have 1, 2. So I will stress you if the button, no, it is here. This you need.
We're going to speak from the sitting position?
As you wish, as you feel comfortable, so it's the same. Yeah. I hope that we will have a lot of discussions because the topic is really practical, and I look forward for an active participation from the audience also.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. It's a great pleasure to be back with the EU LISA agency and to see my colleagues and friends from the agency. I was on the management board from 2012 to 2015 when I retired from the UK Home Office. So I'm no longer a representative of the UK government, but I do chair the European Union NLETS Mobile Working Group. Let me explain NLETS. NLETS stands for European Network for Law Enforcement Technology Services, and the full group includes a range of technology: dark web, covert operations, digital forensics, drones, and mobile is just one of those, but mobile forms a particular subgroup of NLETS, so NLETS Mobile is the subgroup, and that's the entity that I chair. We meet, it works out about twice a year, and that seems to suit practitioners well, to keep in touch and to keep in touch with developments. What I've got really is just 2 main slides to go through 2 key areas of what I'd like to sum up from the work of the group. Now, first of all, we all know what a smartphone is, and it's the use of smartphones in law enforcement, borders as well as police, but I'll deal particularly with police, not least because Sarah, who follows me, is from the Swedish police. This slide just looks at why it is that it's useful to have a mobile device in the hands of a police officer or border officer. These are some of the key benefits. The first area is identity. You know, when a police officer is speaking to somebody in the street and there's a reason for an interview, the first question is often, who is this person? And the second question is, what do we already know about the person? Is there something adverse? Maybe is there a warrant for arrest that I should know about because I should be arresting this person, or whatever it is. And having a handheld machine, portable, highly portable, which can give access to systems that will help the identification, can be extremely useful and efficient in getting that resolved. It can avoid unnecessary arrests, and an unnecessary arrest will cost a lot of time to the police officer and inconvenience the citizen if, you know, it's for a worry which proves to be unfounded. On the other hand, if the policeman thinks, well, I'm not entirely convinced, but it's not worth pursuing it all the way, it might be somebody who's got a warrant for arrest for a serious offence and it slips through. So it helps very much on that sense. A more mundane use, but another important use, is something like parking tickets or speeding tickets, a lot of them issued by the police, and in the old-fashioned way of doing it with a handwritten note, you'd be surprised at how many errors are written down for the registration number or details of the name, and the ticket may end up getting rejected. But by being able to not just put the ticket in accurately, but check the vehicle, check the driver, check the driving license. Validated data goes in, and then at the end of the transaction, the officer can press a button and it transfers it into the central enforcement system, and it's then part of the central administration. So it's a very efficient process. It's a one-stop shop with the whole transaction completed in one hit and on to the next case, freeing up the officer. So it helps also to free officers up, to increase public visibility. These are just some of the benefits. There are others, but in the interest of time, we move on. One of the things that has been very evident in the NLETS Mobile group, which has happened over the last year and a half, year or so has been that there's been a lot of good work with small-scale pilots, and they've been increasing in size. But what we've seen for the first time in the last 1 or 2 meetings of the group has been police areas that have been so convinced that the solution is right that they have rolled it out to pretty much 100% of the police officers, and that's really significant. Obviously, because it maximizes the benefit, but even more than that, it's a statement. It's not, this is kind of a little bit of an experiment and we think it's good and we're going to take it further, but you know, it's now replaced that label by another label that says, this is an absolutely standard part of police equipment. A policeman needs one of these to do the job. And that's a big step forward. And there are 4 regular participants in the group that have now rolled out to 100% or are heading very rapidly to that level and committed to it. Sweden, Netherlands, Denmark, Norway, and I'm sure there will be others. And in fact, the question really is beginning to be posed to the ones that haven't. Can you really justify sending an officer out when you don't have this kind of equipment and real-time access to the range of data? So, getting it right. Now, we've all had goes at writing kind of lists of must-dos down about how to do good projects. I want to emphasize this isn't just something scribbled on the back of an old envelope. This is the result of many meetings of the group, many discussions from people who have implemented these systems about what they think is important. And I'll, by all means, pick up on this in the question. We want to stop soon and allow it to be driven by you. But to pick on a few, it's really clear that it's important to use the introduction of mobile technology, not just to throw technology and computerize what already exists, but to revisit the business process and look for ways of doing it more efficiently, and that's a strong theme. Really engaging with the users, and I don't mean the occasional email and maybe disregard most of the answers, but actually pulling good frontline officers into the team to work with the technical staff and to have a good interchange between them is important. And 3 points that are really related. Piloting, testing, revising, and agile development. You can't really set out on this journey and spend a year writing a specification up and get it right and just go and build it, and then 5 years later you might get round to a replacement. It's a more active, organic process than that. All the experience points to that. And one of the project leads put it this way, that he wouldn't look for the perfect specification. He would look for the perfect team, because you can't write the perfect specification. It's organic and it grows. But with the right team, you can build and adapt to requirements as they arise. A couple of very good examples, I think, probably coming from Sarah in a moment, about examples where that's been done in the Swedish police. I've been reflecting on it because our next meeting is in a month's time in Tallinn as part of the Estonian presidency, and one of the topics we're going to look at is the future. Where is mobile going? What's going to happen? Now, looking back over the last 5 or 10 years, it's been a very radical, disruptive period with what's been coming out on mobile. And these points that we're emphasizing, they aren't there by accident. They're there because you need that to deal with that level of disruptive change and get it right. And I think my conclusion in the paper that I'll be presenting at next month's meeting is that change will continue to be quite disruptive and radical in this area, and therefore these kind of features of a project are going to be very important to enable the success to continue with the new technology that will arrive. So that's my part, and I'll pass over, Sarah, to you so we can hear about the Swedish experience.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I'm Sarah, and I'm working for the Swedish Police, and I'm in charge of the mobile initiative. As Frank said, resolving identity is one of the first things that most countries take on when they start the journey of going mobile, and so did we. It's really, really important that you can do it out in the street. And the first the first thing that we delivered was the ability to resolve the identity. And the way we did that was we asked 35 police officers, what do you need? And they responded in different categories. And if you look at the one to the left there, it's about resolving identity. So what do you need in order to resolve the identity? And they had to prioritize the different things together. Once they've done that, we drew that red little line saying that everything that is above the red line we need to do in our first delivery, and everything else we do later on. So this was how we worked on our project and our product, and it took us about 2 months to do the first delivery, and pretty much everything was new to us back then, but still, we managed to do it. And all the things that were above the red line were delivered in the first version. And the 35 police officers tried it, and they then gave us more ideas for more functionality. And it's been a very organic process in the meanwhile. And the way that they gave us feedback was something that we picked up on an endless meeting from the Netherlands, and that Estonia later on has implemented in their solution too. It's very easy. It's getting feedback from the user in the field in the moment when they can have time to provide us with feedback. So in the app we have a little functionality where they can give us ratings on how fast it is, if it's good enough, if it gives them the information they need, and then they can add a comment and they can write whatever they want in that comment. And for the last 2.5 years when we've had this, we've received about 1,500 evaluations or feedback from police officers. We rolled out to 17,000 people, and we are going to roll out to 9,000 more. And we prioritize the officers in blue because we believe that that would really drive the efficiency on the ground. Yeah. So we just have a slide here. So if you look at the blue line going upwards, that's the number of phones that we rolled out. So we have 17,000 at the moment. And if you look at the pale green line there, it's the number of radio calls to the command and control center regarding resolving identity. And you can see that they have dropped in the correspondence to the number of phones that we rolled out. On the other hand, the number of calls is pretty much the same, but they call for different reasons. Now they call because they have something. They found someone, they issued a ticket, or they've done something in the field. They're not just calling to resolve identity. Yep.
We're happy to pick up on all of this on questions. We hope to hear what you would like to know about this from the EU committee and from the Swedish example.
If I may ask one question, because we will have, I think it's better to have a dedicated session for our audience afterwards. So, but I have two quick questions, if I may. Frank, first of all, I saw in your presentation a strange declaration that we can use technology to find what we already know. And I would need an explanation from you on this. So it was on your first slide. So isn't it technology that gives us an opportunity to really find out things that we do not know? We heard yesterday about artificial intelligence. So why you highlighted this, specific?
I think more will come for sure, and it's a feature of a lot of these systems that it looks very small and almost insignificant that an officer is standing with just a smartphone, but it's typical that these solutions, I don't know how many separate computers your smartphone attaches to. Do you have a count? How many in the infrastructure that the Swedish system?
So we talk to about 18 different databases from the phone.
And it can be even more, driving license, criminal records, fingerprints, passport checks, lots and lots of different things all brought together. But I'm sure in the future there will be more, and I know that some of the projects are already beginning to say, well, what about, say, positional awareness, so that the officer moves to another area of the police force and it pops up and says, this incident's just happened in the force, here's a piece of information you should know, it's just ahead on the road, and et cetera, so that it's responding and preempting and prompting the user with things that would be useful if only he knew to ask for them, but it can maybe anticipate what he would do. There will be more of that for sure in the future. This is what I mean about the future disruptive change.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question, if I may. You said that we have to move from building detailed specifications to really more agile approaches. How easy or how difficult it is to do like that? We working in the European, let's say, in a European body and managing big contracts, we really sometimes we get exhaustive in creating detailed specifications, and sometimes maybe we also restrict ourselves or our users. We saw a different approach from you, so can you comment on this? And maybe it would, we would also need Axel to comment as a vendor.
Examples.
We need to, of course, stay within the legislation that we have, but it's trying to either question it or try to change it. So sometimes police officers give us feedback and want stuff that we can't do, and then we just respond to them that we can't do it, but we'll try to change it. But mostly they just ask for things that we can do, that perhaps is already available on a desktop computer and they want it in the phone, and then it's not a problem for us to build it. So we're trying to do it in a minimalistic way in the beginning and then add on more functionality as we go, in order to make sure that we actually are delivering what they can use out in the field.
You are doing in-house development or outsourcing?
No, in-house, yeah.
I mean, as the example, at one of the meetings, the Netherlands said they'd thought of having a little discrete vibration on the phone. If you do a name check and you're looking at the person you're speaking to, and perhaps he has a conviction for assaulting police, it's quite handy for the officer to know that very urgently, but not to make a big song and dance about it. And a very discreet vibration on the phone in the officer's hand, he doesn't need to read to see, he knows there's a warning of that type, and then he can adapt his behavior and be careful. And you came back to the next meeting 4 months later and said, we thought that was a great idea, so we went straight back and formed an Agile team and worked out how to trigger the alert and what would be the criteria, and tested it, built it, and it's part of the Swedish system. So just picking up a good example of following it. It's interesting in contract terms, because if you build a big specification, I've spoken to suppliers and said, do you find you're locked in, and it can become very inflexible with a spec that's been written and it's too detailed and the people haven't really understood it and it's not got the room to expand in the way we've been describing? And I said yes, and sometimes the developers come to the boss and say, we've understood this better now, it should be built this way, not the way in the spec, let's change. And he has to say, yeah, but I've had to sign a contract that says I'll build it like that, and if I don't, I get penalized. So you're right, but please build it the way the spec says, not the way you know it really wants to be built. And that's a frustration really for everybody. Yes. So it's a challenge for how we contract better, maybe, on the things that benefit from being flexible. Not everything, but the things that should be flexible, to keep them flexible if you can, and maybe build an arrangement between the customer and the supplier so that it can adapt to that. Maybe scope for discussion later.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, there are many ways to do this, but the way that we've chosen to do it in Sweden is that we build our own capacity with our own internal teams. So we are really flexible, and we can do whatever is necessary and all the changes that are needed too.
Okay, we will have the opportunity to discuss indeed different approaches and pros and cons of each one. Now I would like to give the floor to João, that will present us what happens in the hotspots and what are the challenges faced.
Thank you. Good morning. I would like to start by thanking the opportunity to speak about Asylum. hotspots context, and Asylum also in the technology from a technology point of view, and extending this the pleasure to be in this panel also, and to the moderator, of course. So. Why do I come here to speak about efficiency in the hotspots? Because we've been in the hotspots for the past 2 years in EASO, and so we've gathered quite a lot of experience in the field, and this is my agenda for today. I will briefly speak about the asylum procedure in the hotspots context. I will also try to identify what are the opportunities for mobile technology, and also, as I observed recently, what are the additional practical applications that we have. So, you've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it in pictures and in footage. In the hotspots, the pictures are worth a lot of words. And the conditions that our professionals work there are sometimes very complicated, and they are worth our applause and our appraisal. And I'm not sure if you can see on the picture on the top corner, but that is actually the EASO compound in Moria hotspot, and the compound is covered by a chain link fence. And this fence is not a Faraday cage, so we're not doing it for security of communications. It's because actually rocks are thrown into the compound, not specifically at a person, but rather out of frustration for the situations that people that are living there. So it is actually a complicated situation that work is being done, and of course efficiencies is something that we should discuss and try to improve, also from a technological point of view. So. The efficiency that they face in the hotspots is often related to unreliable systems, unreliable infrastructure. I'm sure you can relate to this because these are remote locations, and within the remote locations they are remote hotspots. So, and often internet is something that is a difficult commodity. Also, they face several times the risk of interruption, so you can also relate to this when you have a lengthy interview. You could be interrupted due to a bit of chaotic environment that you have around you. Also, the risk of having to interrupt due to a riot or something related. You work in a container, and the container is not exactly soundproof. So there are also some additional factors of interruption there. They work, the experts in the hotspot, they work in a low portability environment, so they work in a desktop format. And also in the exercises of information provisioning, they have a symmetric reach, so it's a low, let's call it like that, a low crowd of people that they can reach in simultaneously. And also this happens in dedicated points or in arrival or landing spots. So there is low reach also from that point of view. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the Agile procedure, but it's already, in normal circumstances, already a lengthy process. In the hotspot context, it becomes a bit more complicated because there are many actors. The cases have to go from A to B and from B to C, and sometimes back to A, with several actors interfering on the process, which also leads to inefficiency of the process itself. And lastly, there is also the problem where we face that there is high turnover of staff in the hotspot. So experts, they do come, they do their work, and they do the work with quality, but they typically, when they are starting to settle into their routines, they have to leave the hotspot. And since they come from different backgrounds and from different circumstances, that leads to additional inefficiency and different, they know what they do, of course, but sometimes a lower level of quality than desired. So obviously, as you can observe from what I've just said, mobile could be part of the solution. Mobile is offline, can be offline by design. It is highly portable and highly flexible in its applications. It offers greater reach and to a broader audience. let's say in an asymmetric fashion. And it's, you also can understand it, it's optimal for easy reference, it's a highly portable device, and you can easily consult it. And a good example of this is the application that was developed by EASO for the EU relocation program. It is just another tool in the toolkit to complement the program. It's not an e-forms application, it's not an e-government application, it's more of a reference to understand the rights and the obligations of the applicant for relocation. But it's, again, it's very welcome in the toolkit itself. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with the asylum procedure. I will just briefly, and forgive me if I make any glaring mistake in the description. I am from the technology field, not from the legal field. But in a nutshell, after the arrival, the migrant is registered as third country national by member state officials and by Frontex officials, what we normally call the first contact officials. The migrant is then asked if he has the intention to declare for international protection. Thus, if he does so, and I'm describing the flow chart in a positive way, of course, and if he does so, he becomes an asylum applicant, and there takes place then the lodging of the application, where we collect few personal data, such as age, country of origin, etc., affiliation, marital status. The flow of the asylum procedure continues into what we normally call the Dublin process, if you will, where the cornerstone of the Dublin process is that the asylum applicant should be, its case should be processed in the member state where it arrives. That's one of the cornerstones of Dublin, and so that potentially leads to another aspect of the procedure, which is the transfer, because you, by design, you cannot shop for asylum. You cannot you should not have secondary movements. So, if the applicant has been detected as arrived in another member state, it should be transferred to the member state that is responsible for it for this case. If the transfer does not happen, then the Dublin proceeds in the member state that is responsible. But in the cases of a hotspot, and why do we have hotspots? Because we have a significant amount of numbers that cannot be accommodated by a single member state. So the relocation program kicks in, and the relocation program is no more than a solidarity program from other member states to absorb the numbers, the sheer numbers of arrivals from the border or the problem-facing member state. So the relocation can also have this feature of transfer, like I said, solidarity, to the member state that can handle the case. But if not, the so-called interview or the assessment is then conducted in the hotspot. The interview is composed of the admissibility checks and the eligibility for international protection. So it's the lengthy interview process in these two decision boxes here, and it's conducted by member states and by EASO experts. And finally, there is then there takes place the notification that can be positive, of course, and if it's positive, the migrant or asylum applicant gets integrated into society. And if it's negative, he can then appeal. He can appeal more than once, and if continues to be negative, he is then returned to the country of origin by member states and Frontex officials. So, in a nutshell, this is the flow chart that we face in the hotspots. And in order to address this complex problem, and again, the difficulties and the inefficiencies, EASO and the turnout, EASO has developed a series of practical guides that help consolidate some terminology, help solidify these processes, and also have a minimum baseline of quality when we do interviews and have support for reference. And just in a nutshell, very briefly, we have the how-to for first contact officials, so to identify indications or signs that persons are in need for international protection. How should we do the criteria for exclusion from international protection? What are the standards that we should have in the reception centers? Standards for food, for health, for clothing, etc. What is the assessment that we should do when we collect evidence during the interview? It can be geographical reference, it can be other types of information. And finally, again, coming back to the quality of the process, because it has to stand legally in a court of law, a checklist, a minimum baseline of quality standards in a personal interview was also developed. So coming back to the mobility aspect and how this technology can support the processes, just to give you three examples where these are low-hanging fruits, so easy wins. During the process of registration, we could have the reference guide on access to Asylum for the first contact officials. I'm not sure if you realize, but these are people that are at the border, so border guards and Frontex officials. They don't have the means to carry booklets or to have computers with them. So having this guide with them in a mobile fashion is something that could be significantly gaining of efficiency. Other guide that I've mentioned is the reception standards. Upon the registration, the reception is then also assigned, and these standards should be communicated properly to the migrant. And a third tool that we've developed and could easily be converted to mobile is the identification of persons with special needs. And this tool is designed specifically, it's sort of a decision tree, is designed specifically to address that if a certain person that you are discussing with or speaking to is showing signs of distress, has been a victim of sexual or physical violence, has been a victim of psychological distress, etc. So it's a checklist, again, a decision tree on how to identify these persons. Could also be easily converted into a mobile application. Then on the admissibility process, there is also room for improvement and for mobile application with the checklist on the exclusion. So instead of having to do this in a more cumbersome way, you could do it in your mobile device. And lastly, on the eligibility, the reference guide for methodology on interviews. Extremely important. Again, quality is something that we should be always concerned of when we do interviews, and also on the examination process, how to gather information from the migrant, from the asylum applicant, how to assess the credibility of what they are telling you, and how to assess the risk of the situation that they are in. Again, as I've said, it's actually a month ago I was in the hotspots, and also to complement my presentation here, some quick examples. These are not exhaustive, that we could put applications in mobile phones. Interview scheduling, for instance. Nowadays, interview scheduling is done in a billboard, in the information point, in the camp info points, which leads to errors, to mistakes, which leads to no-shows on interviews, which leads to inefficiency. Translation, always a hot topic. Further reference in translation is always necessary. So an application for that, it already exists. It's just a matter of putting it into practice. Dictation and transcription. This is actually the most time-consuming aspect of an interview. It usually takes 5 to 6 hours to complete an interview because of the accurate transcription. So if we can have, and this technology already exists, if you can have an high accuracy tool for the dictation and then transcription, it would be a significant gain of efficiency. Queuing and ticketing. Residents of the reception of the camps usually have to be in queues for information provisioning or for health checks. So that's another aspect that we could do. And further reach of the information provisioning, specific on relocation. It can also be another themes. But instead of having it just after the arrival on of our borders, having it further in the countries of origin, and investing a little bit more on information and education on the rights and the obligations of the migrants. And the some last aspects, identification of dialect. It's also something that already exists. It's not something new, and it's quite important in the efficient identification of the country of origin, because I'm sure you also can relate to the fact that there are many dialects in big countries, and sometimes it's hard to exactly pinpoint where the migrants are coming from and to verify that information. Biometric identification. Perhaps not for law enforcement, naturally, purposes, but perhaps for asylum purposes. It could also be something that we could work on, but I leave that to my colleagues in the panel. And lastly, reception management. This is something that could easily also be achieved via QR codes for food dispensing, clothing, bed allocation, etc. So it's something else that we could apply in practical terms in the hotspots with mobile technology. This is my last slide. I would just like to end with the words that EASO, the European Asylum Support Office, is about harmonization. That's the key word in our mission. And I am thoroughly convinced that technology is an excellent means, an excellent tool for also the harmonization that we have to go through. Thank you.
Thank you, João. I have an observation to make, especially from your last slide. You describe solutions that from technology point of view are not really complex or huge applications, or really, I mean, big software needed on the background. So we're talking about scheduling, access to information portals, checklists and things like that. So I wonder, while it seems pretty simple, why we don't have the solutions on the ground already? And when we are thinking of mobility, we are thinking of flexibility. Mm-hmm. So what prevents us today to have the perfect solutions for the offices working? Is it, I don't know, the low, I mean, the response rate from the vendors? Is it the difficult conditions on the ground, mud, wet environment, huge lines, etc.? Is it the legal framework that prevents you to deploy already such solutions? What is your
Some of these solutions can be implemented without difficulty, and not even from the legal framework point of view. Well, what I've observed is that it's more about the regulations that we have to face as an organization to go through this process of procurement, to go through this process of engaging vendors, to have these solutions being deployed in a more practical way. So that's my main difficulty that I've faced so far in deploying such applications. It's true.
Mm-hmm. So it's more of the bureaucracy of the framework under which you have to really function, yes, and not other constraints on technology or from vendor perspective.
Yes.
Okay, so interesting to further discuss this. I could pass the floor now to the representative of the industry that may give us also some additional insight. So Axel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So yeah, last but not least, I hope, I would like to give a brief overview about the past, the present and the future, hopefully. But also looking to the challenges the industry is facing and dealing with all the maybe new requirements, but we will see that sometimes the new thing is quite an old one already. And actually, we see how mobile devices actually store information and how they are linked in between all the architecture in the framework. Currently, we see, not on the biometrics mobile devices, but in general, the proliferation of mobile devices is really staggering. Everybody has at least 5 phones, maybe old ones at home, so sometimes we don't know where to put it to. Technology is a key driver in it. So in the mass market, smartphone or tablet manufacturing, there are so many new things, not only on the hardware side, including new sensors, but also on the software side. So we see identity management directly on the device with fingerprints, with face, sometimes also with iris. And this actually is already shown that the use cases are so different. We have, for different purposes, we have a variety of mobile devices, and even with a single mobile device, the use case can change from location to location. When I heard, for example, from Sarah that in the north, the policeman wearing hand gloves because it's cold, or compared to ones living in the desert and facing different issues with the mobile devices. In general, the end-user demands are quite consistent when they require something from the industry in terms of mobile devices. Smaller, lighter, more efficient, more powerful, low energy consuming. So this is actually the classic regular thing which everybody was actually requiring. What we see currently looking at the history to mobile devices, that it has evolved into several sectors. In the beginning, we saw a lot of biometric enrollment devices for the law enforcement. Then also the requirements came from the border management perspective, but also nowadays also having justice and correction management, but also in the enterprises looking at the multimodal authentication, of course in retail, but also not to forget the military itself. The challenges the industry is actually facing is, and yesterday I heard a good word that you don't have to take care, or if you don't know how does this work, just specify what you want. I would actually reframe it a bit, make sure and figure out what you really want. And this is one of the key aspects actually when talking to the industry. Having a monolith of specification doesn't help anything. We need, and we heard it already, evolving of an application of a mobile system in the whole architecture is key. So this will happen in the end when your end user is talking to their bosses and saying, yeah, this is not what we wanted, and then the money has spent, and who's to blame for? So we see actually a variety of use cases for these all-in-one products, or having, let's say, a base smartphone surrounded by some peripherals. This is actually a philosopher's question. Some organizations prefer to have an all-in-one device, which is very rugged, maybe military standards. Others saying, yeah, I already have these fancy, nice iPhones and a lot of laptops, rugged ones with me. Why not just placing a lot of peripherals around it, which suit my needs? We're also facing challenges on data privacy versus interoperability. So people saying, oh yeah, you're able to talk to this and this database. Yeah, technology, no problem. But there are regulations. And this is actually one of the critical aspects of designing a new mobile system, how it can be fit into such an architecture. Of course, price pressure is one thing. Or let's say, dealing with special use cases, the industry often faces a challenge that this is just a rare use case which requires maybe a small volume of mobile systems, and therefore the return on investment is not given. Here we need to be more flexible on the software side to hopefully cover all aspects without any additional development on the hardware side. The smart devices and the smart devices sector, especially from the commercial point of view, is also a challenge for us. Years ago, there was a requirement nearly in all of the tenders, and still they are, but here you see the challenge, maintaining for minimum 5 years. And asking you, do you really can buy a smartphone from 5 years ago? I don't think so. And the question is how to deal with that even in the procurement process. Therefore, the flexibility need to also support different types of mobile devices, laptops, smartphones. For example, in the police, it was given that it was used in a closed environment, in a closed network. There was no really focus on direct encryption because nobody could go into the police station and go directly into the critical areas because this was highly secured. Nowadays, with the mobile devices, we bringing this out to the real life, so to say. And here, we have to face different issues with mobile systems. A lot of those functions we will use, or we are using, provided by the operating system, also require an online connection, and also they will leave some data with those manufacturers of those devices. And sometimes this is a really, let's say, the opposite what, for example, law enforcement wants. Also, submission via open networks. The question here is, how do we encrypt the data, also in terms of data privacy protection? So also the new architecture needs to be designed, especially when it comes to interoperability. Okay, coming to evolution. What you see here is from the big and bulky, what we call jump kits. As soon as, for example, fingerprint scanners became smaller to fit in a suitcase, the first suitcases came out. Here we see something with a rugged laptop, fingerprint scanner, iris scanner, a military battery, maybe a consumer camera, but also already running pretty easy enrollment software together with onboard matching, a little database on it. So actually all the functionality we currently want, we're already there, but just a bit more bulky and heavy. So then all the all-in-one devices have been created, providing even a more, let's say, unique experience in enrollment, but also in the communication. There we can just easily plug into communication ways like satellites or Wi-Fi or LAN networks. And then already came the split between enrollment and verification devices. For verification, low quality is actually, high quality is not required, so you could go with a less quality fingerprint sensor or a camera with lower resolution, for example. But as I was saying that there's also the requirement to reuse your current devices, what will be the logical consequence? In evolving actually our enrollment systems and verification systems, we have to combine it with existing data. And here, fingerprint sensors became quite small because of technology innovation, like in here, the TFT sensors, but also leveraging all the innovation coming from the manufacturer of a certain laptop, smartphone, or whatever. Just an example how the use cases or the variety of use cases leading to different mobile systems. We have, for example, portable solution, still in a suitcase because you maybe don't need it all the time and you don't need to wear it. You can stay in a police car, for example. You have authentication devices, also portable solution. But also you can run around either with a rugged all-in-one enrollment device or just having a little combination of your smartphone with some fingerprint sensor, iris scanner, face scanner. On the authentication side, it looks quite the same, but here we see more and more that even in private life, also in the enterprise, authentication becoming key. Because there were so many cybercrime attacks to databases, to police systems, and so on, that this aspect, not having a biometric enrollment of the suspect, is key, but also protecting the whole environment from hackers. And therefore, authentication, even on the mobile side, is also one of the challenges we're facing. Interoperability, of course, key is compliance with industry standards, but it's not only on the hardware side, but also on the software side. The compatibility of data formats, I would say, is crucial. Here, even in the bigger database, we might target and let them talk to each other. We need to have a common set of interfaces. The so-called common language, but the common language is already there because we have specifications of our interchange formats for tiny little data pieces of biometrics, for example. Also for the interoperability, it would be necessary to change the architecture to also include relay stations, which not only storing and forwarding some messages, we also need to have this more intelligent to translate it, to convert the data into other formats, the other databases understanding, also form a fusion result when there is, for example, a query of several databases need to go to one point in the end. But also redirecting information in different architecture cycles. Multi-purpose usage, we need to leverage application A on one day, for example, but the same device needs to be ready to use for another purpose, maybe the next day. So, and this can only be done if you have really a bunch of application and also, as you mentioned, reacting quite fast on the end user needs. And as a conclusion, what we see is actually nothing new. As things change, they remain the same. Mobile is the future, but also the present. There will be more and more, but yeah, that's actually nothing new. Technology is the door opener for further improvements, but the capabilities of a certain device requires also change of the process. If you don't understand that the new capabilities will change your business process, then the whole thing won't work really in the end. So the positive impacting also on the cost savings, making the devices cheaper. I know this is one of the biggest questions coming to the industry, but nevertheless, we take care of having better quality devices and trying to make the integration of the mobile device into the architectural framework more safe and more secure. And this was my final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Axel, for these interesting perspectives. I'm wondering, finally, you representing in this panel the market. It's a question to you and maybe to the audience later, as we have many industry representatives. Finally, is this an interesting and profitable market for you, or it is not worth investing more? You mentioned various aspects, that you need all-in-one solutions. There is low return on investment. There is price pressure. You need really to do many things in one shot. These suitcases that include everything, flexible solutions on the ground that are standardized and you can carry over everywhere. So will you do further steps there? Do you think that market will invest further?
Also, as an outlook to history, the industry has changed and has to change to reflect all these current requirements. Let's say 10, 15 years ago, it was quite easy to have just a high-quality enrollment device manufactured, and everybody wants to have it, although it's maybe more expensive. But nowadays, you also need to collaborate with third-party companies because you cannot deal with all the requirements. You need to work with cloud-based providers of some features. And this all together leads actually to a different company strategy and architecture. But in the end, yes, evolving also the company, there's still some business, of course.
Okay, so very interesting to hear. The floor is yours, and maybe we would like also to hear some thoughts that you have. Other industry vendors are in the panel. What steps you will take. We saw indeed that there is a lack of infrastructure really adapted to the operations on the ground and software solutions that you can easily plug and play everywhere. I mean, taking from one hotspot to the other, for example. So the floor is yours for question. I noted some keywords: standardization, flexibility, outsourcing, all-in-one solutions, partnerships in the market, just to maybe stimulate more your reactions. Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Joao answered one of the questions I had on dialect detection, because when I was speaking with Rasa from Frontex, that was a challenge. There was a question, okay, we can collect biometric information, but what's that going to do with this refugee or the asylum seeker that we know nothing about? So you answered that question, but back to standards. So there's ISO 30125 is trying to set up some baseline best practice for it. And I think, Frank, you talked about, and Sarah talked about being able to, the primary need is to do identity resolution. And I think one of you mentioned 18 databases. So as Axel said, there's interchange standards to get the request to the back end. But what is that back-end integration, and who's authorized to search 18 databases, and what type of interoperability is there between nation states and within Europe and outside of Europe?
Do you want to?
The 18 databases I referenced to are national databases, so those are for our own citizens.
They'd be the sort of databases the police officer could go back to the police station and log on to a desktop PC and connect to. I mean, UK Police National Computer, Ident 1 fingerprint search, maybe local authority voter roll, maybe criminal intelligence, driver license verification, maybe passport he has access to. Nothing necessarily new from that, but brokering it. There may be a need for something clever in the infrastructure to be able to pull together different responses from multiple systems at once, given that the priority on the operational officer on the front line is not to scroll through pages and pages of data. It needs a crisp thing. And so the way you design something that presents a concise response may take some thought, but largely what we envisage and talking about is it's the systems the officer would already have, but condensed and accessible in real time on the street.
Okay, thank you. But so at this point, you're enabling so the standardization is around the mobile environment that is shared by a half a dozen countries at this point, but each country is providing law enforcement access to their own data sets at this point. There's not a European data set that's enabled through this technology yet.
Well, if the officers have access, if the police force, as it will do, have access to EU-LISA systems like SIS2 and so on, then that's just another system that could be plugged into from the hub that's doing it. Why not? All subject to appropriate laws on privacy, what it's right to do, whether there's legal power to say take a fingerprint on the street. There may not be in some countries, there are some that aren't, and whether it's appropriate to connect to each of the systems.
Let me add one more point, because I find this question actually quite interesting, because making the life of the policeman easier has here nothing to do with interoperability between systems, which are actually specified in large projects. This is really just getting information of what you already have. And in most cases, even in police systems or in justice systems, websites, information is available on websites, but they are lacking of having just a mobile view on a smartphone. Or the policeman does not know how to enter because it doesn't have any login capabilities to do that. And this is actually one thing often forgotten in the interoperability discussion. Interoperability here doesn't mean we have a conflict of different formats, because it's just language, it's just written things. It's easy to exchange it. It's just really a question making mobile the availability of this data of the local databases.
Yes, please.
Yes, good morning. This is Sandrine from Morpho IDEMIA now. I wanted to react on Axel and Joao's presentations and the role of industry, because Joao was saying that EASO has not the capability to get some applications and some mobile devices to help the processes in the hotspots. And I wanted to share the experience we've had 2 years ago when we visited the hotspots and we proposed some solution for Greece typically, and there was no possibility to proceed and to build a project. So my question is, well, the industry is ready to propose some solutions, devices, etc., but how can we build with the European agencies or the member states? I don't know how to work on that. So this is my question.
So we are a difficult client, I understand. And this was indeed part of my question. And I would need also the reactions from the other participants on this question. Because yes, we know we are difficult clients. We know as we said, we have exhaustive specifications with difficult conditions, long procurements, bureaucracy. But is the market also ready to do these partnerships, to break the silos in the cooperation and to share the profits also? So maybe the floor is yours.
Would you like?
No, I make Maria's words mine. It's always the bureaucracy that stands a bit in the way. Although bureaucracy is necessary, because this is public money, so there must be an easier way for us to achieve what we need to achieve in order to drive efficiency, also in cooperation with private sector, naturally. But to answer that particular question, I don't have any other solution other than following the necessary bureaucracy. It's a must. There is no other way around it.
So the market has to deal with it. There is no other way, I understand. Yes, please.
Sorry. For the sake of online streaming, could you please also stand up when you pose your question? I'll give you the mic. As always.
There is always protocol, you know. Okay. I was tempted to react on the discussion so far. Well, first of all, it is clear that EU agencies as EU entities have to follow certain rules. And unfortunately, we are not masters of those rules, so I'm afraid the message to the industry here is that the industry should adapt to those rules and be as flexible as possible. This is what we see in many cases from our vendors, but this is the way forward. But I have a different question. Actually, the rules are rules, but on the other hand, in order to make the best match between what we want as public bodies or what the policy demand dictates us to want from the industry, and then the industry to be able to respond. I think it comes down also to the question of the standards, but I want to turn it into a different perspective. It is true that we have a number of technical standards that guide how technically to implement mobile solutions. So far, so good. But I think Joao would agree with me that now there is something that goes on top or beyond the technical standards that we still miss. And here is the question to the panel: Do we need to think for standards that go beyond the technicality and, for example, define, let me call it a standard reference architecture when we speak for implementations in hotspots, or a standard reference architecture that when you speak about implementation of mobile solutions, or we should keep the situation as it is where those efforts are siloed at national level, and beyond that we don't really have a common standard that can guide the implementation and can guide also the industry to be more responsive, adaptive to the demand. So what is the view of the panel on that?
We've always seen the usefulness of having some sort of principles set out in NLET's mobile, eMobiDig as it used to be called, and we set out a fairly simple reference model early in 2011 on having a structure so that multiple mobile devices at the front end could come into a communication hub and a broker, and then farm out to different systems that they need to connect to, so that it becomes relatively easy to plug in one extra system at the back end or one extra device at the front end and not have to rebuild everything. And that's important, not least with the pace of change of mobile devices, because they're coming out all the time and new requirements and systems are replaced. You've got to have that flexibility built in. It was only a simple architecture, a general principle, but you know, it's lasted for 6 years in writing, and we reconfirmed that at a recent meeting that it was still there. So we kind of hold to that broad principle, but we haven't defined it in a really, really tight way in which, you know, a full-blown ISO technical standard might be defined. So we've made some moves, but there is a need for flexibility between different situations, even against the same kind of similar sets of back-end systems. I don't know if you want to add.
I'm more in favor of a stepping stone approach. So several steps towards, let's say, a toolkit approach to have a set of tools to help drive efficiency. And it could be quite more complex to have one set of architecture rather than have, I'm sure, not sure if I think we were in that conference together, where it was discussed let's say, the spaghetti approach to architecture, and we have the possibility of having data points available from applications that compose this toolkit to build a more comprehensive information system that can fit the purpose in the end. I would be more inclined into that architecture approach, yes.
To add on this from the European agency perspectives also, what we have seen, indeed every member state can build its own solutions on the ground. However, if we want to talk about the European capability and how we can really support these efforts where needed and when needed, in crisis situations, for example, indeed I think we are obliged to build on standardization and to speak about reference architecture. And this does not reduce the flexibility. If you standardize, maybe it increases in the future your flexibility to deploy quickly changes, to have new solutions that can add on these standards and are commonly understood. So from my point of view, we cannot avoid if we want a quick response. And I have also a question to you, Frank, because you mentioned, I think, 4 member states participating, or 5, I took a note. What prevents, a more active participation from a broader, let's say, audience? Are the member states interested for such standards, or no? Everybody wants to, work in a silo, develop their own solutions.
All member states are welcome to attend the meetings. We find in practice about half or so of the member states have chosen to come. So those are the states that we are more familiar with the solutions of. We're well aware there are other states that are also doing mobile work. We just don't know about them quite so much because we don't sit with the developers and the project teams to the same extent. What I was saying about the 4 was of the 12, 14, whatever, who regularly come, 4 of them have reached the point where it's now a standard piece of equipment for the police because all the officers, or more or less all of the officers, are using a device like that. And I think that number will grow. We've reached a point where it's very tangible that it's accelerating, and others are following in that path. We are very happy for others to join. We have some industry participation as well, which has been very useful. I mean, going back to that example from 2011 when we drew the architecture diagram, the industry, 2 members of industry in the group participating in the discussion were instrumental in helping us define that in the discussion. So we've really benefited from cooperating industry, but there are competitive issues and we can't have all the discussions always involving industry, so it's in moderation.
So for you, it's not more of a lack of interest, but more of practical difficulty sometimes and diffusion of information to join such initiatives.
Particularly with member states, we wouldn't say no to anyone who wants to come. There would be a practical issue if, every member state wanted to come, and maybe with many representatives, we would have a very large conference. We're at quite a large size when we meet, but we haven't said no because we're full to any member states. They're welcome. If there are others here, please get in touch with me.
Okay, thank you. I think we have 10 more minutes from some questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Sebastian Mur from GoSwift in Tallinn. I'd like to hear the views of the panel on the opportunity, maybe in the near or far future, to include the citizen or traveler's smartphone or device, maybe in the context of systematic biometric checks at the border, as an example. And what, if it's realistic in your opinion, and can they be trusted at all, or what could be the implications? Thank you.
So it is directed to some speaker specifically, or whoever would like to take the floor?
Yes, pretty much whoever. I suppose in the case of EASO, a bit less so, but maybe from the industry or for Frank or the police.
I have also been on the Article 6 committee in Brussels on the passport chip security, and I'm familiar with that standard and the complex cryptography and standards in the ICAO 9303 definition. We can maybe envisage, in the future, a mobile phone becoming a mobile identity to the extent of even becoming a passport which is loaded with the chip, but it would take a lot more than we've currently got to reach that stage. But there are some very interesting things happening with the development of mobile identity. I'm sure that will be coming through in the future. Maybe the border isn't the first application where you could use that because it's such a high premium on the exact conformity on security grounds. But over time, we surely, reason dictates, must be moving in that direction. I think too, related to what you're saying, slightly different way, is I think too, surely police forces are going to see more and more engagement with citizens through electronic communication, email, requesting progress chasing on something the police have agreed to follow up. And has anybody been found yet in relation to the burglary at my house, and here's the reference number and a check, as you would do with Amazon, where's my stuff kind of thing. I mean, it's the way everyone expects large organizations to respond, and I think that I guess that will feature. It's an issue that we have down to talk about at the next Emobidig meeting in a month as part of our thinking of the future. And it's a feature I've put in a paper that I'm preparing for that meeting. I don't know that we have any hugely concrete answers yet, but it was certainly on the radar.
If I may, we briefly discussed this yesterday, and Axel can help you here. The consumer devices are not prepared for law enforcement yet, biometrical challenges. But Axel, please.
Yeah, when I understand the question also correctly, is using the smartphone as a replacement for some passports, or using it to prove the personal identity. Yes, of course, why not? I mean, we are in Estonia. For example, they also had this approach, but we also see some things like having ID cards combined with credit card companies on the same ID card, for example, in Africa. So why not? I would reframe my answer a bit in that way that so far in law enforcement and also dealing with border security, we always had a transactional-based approach. So we have one border crossing, we have this individual having this biometric data, having this demographic data, and that's it. We come to a point where we also need to look at the individual not only from this perspective, but also combining more of information we could actually get from the open space, so to say, also combining information from Twitter, maybe also approving bank accounts, combining with credit card companies, that there is an account, for example, linked to this mobile phone, but also checking local authentication on the device or maybe with other providers. So this is possible, but looking at the past and the bureaucracy, I would say, yeah, maybe in 10 years.
Andy Smith had your hand up earlier. Did you get answered?
Yes, please. We still have time for some questions.
Yeah, Andy Smith from CETA. It was more a question, and Axel, I think you sort of touched on it. With the massive increase in mobile technology and mobile devices being out there, are you seeing an increase in the challenge for both physical device security, access security, and indeed cyber security around it as well? It's probably an open question.
Yeah.
Clearly, yeah. I mean, this is key. Well, over the last years, we saw a lot of breaches into larger credit card companies, into healthcare systems, even into law enforcement agencies. So, yeah, I slightly touched this, as you said, when saying we need also to secure the devices itself, not on the mobile way, but also as the mobile device actually offers a door into our protected networks. And because of that, even on the tiniest little smartphone on the border with a policeman, we need to make sure that there is the full security we can provide for the systems as we would do in our data centers. And there we just have the chance of using the biometrics and combining them. So having not only one factor, having multi-factors. Technology is there. We just need to use it directly on the mobile devices.
The security of smartphones, top-end smartphones, has got considerably better compared to how it was, and it's quite common for, in fact, it may be universal for high-end smartphones to have a really secure element, a chip inside the phone, which can be trusted to safeguard key information like encryption keys that are used for authentication down the line to prove that it's the right device talking. And that's important and is an important stage. Without that, you can't trust it. But then look at the developments that have happened with Touch ID and banking and fingerprint access to bank accounts and things like that. You can see a lot of the elements that you need there and forming. It's heading in the right direction. How you measure when it's right for a particular application? I'm not entirely sure yet.
Yeah, but nevertheless, just to add one more thing. Years ago, it was key, especially in law enforcement, that operating systems which can be completely secured and in a closed scenario. Nowadays, nearly all of the operating systems are online systems, and this is what we cannot really control, that the operating system manufacturers and designers maybe open some backdoors. We have to touch when we're using the device without knowledge. So this is one thing we have to rely on the regulation, on the politics, to prevent such thing happen.
Yes, I wanted also to make a last comment on this, because now we are talking for operations on the ground, so this makes the conditions and how we can really safeguard security even more difficult. So physical access is easy on the equipment, on the infrastructure, in the hotspots, for example. We saw that we cannot really, safeguard all the devices, the networks. We have to sometimes to use public networks to access the national system from the hotspot. So this makes the condition even more difficult, and the security factors is getting even more important. This being said, we have 2 more minutes. If there is no other question, okay, we can take one question, and then I would just like a final, point that you would like to make as outcome of this discussion, and what you would like that the audience, has in their mind starting from tomorrow, and having followed this interesting session, please.
Hi, Dan Bachnummer with the Accenture. So just I wanted to pick up on what Frank was talking about in terms of using a personal device for authentication, and the analogies with Doc 9303, which defines both the logical data structure of what's in the chip in e-passport and that exchange. So what we're looking at, what other companies are looking at, is leveraging blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology for that. So so your phone becomes a personal data store, and as you were saying, with the private key stored in the secure element, and whatever, where you could, as you said, read the, for example, the photo that's digitally signed by the issuing agency, all that could be preserved within your personal data store in your smart device, and then relying entities like a government, like a humanitarian entity could consult the distributed ledger for just no PII, because GDPR says that right to be forgotten. We don't want to put any PII in an immutable ledger, otherwise you cannot be forgotten. But it's just a pointer to, in this case, your personal data store. So why would a government trust that selfie or that? Well, you wouldn't, but you could trust digitally signed, just like in your e-passport, photo, finger, whatever you put in your personal data structure, that is signed by a trusted entity like an issuing agency. So I think that's going to emerge, and that will garner some trust. The final comment is what's becoming more prevalent is the FIDO protocol, Fast Identity Online. Again, that you're providing your own biometric on your own device. FIDO is moving towards doing, they already have a certification for the protocol. They're working on certification for security and for biometric authenticators. And I was speaking with Brett, their CEO, about a government, more and more governments are joining FIDO, about the ability for a government, once they collect a biometric, to push it to the phone. Right now, that's not part of the protocol, but they're looking into that. That could, in these examples, establish trust in that, because if it's the UK government pushing that and signing it, where you could tell if it's been manipulated or not, that could enable trust in that.
Thank you.
So, any last comment on this observation, or the last, your last, what would you would like the audience to remember getting out of this session?
Should we go along the line?
Yes, please.
I repeat, I think it's a very exciting time. We've had meetings over many years, and they've been very productive always, but some of the earlier meetings I remember going away thinking, yeah, it's great, really good pilot, really good ideas, but I want to see this operating at scale and becoming a standard police tool. And we have finally reached the point where, for some good examples, Sweden being a key one, it's reached that point, and I think it's going to spread now, and then it will augment further. So, you know, it's a point we've been waiting for a long time, and congratulations to people like Sarah and the other countries who've done the same for getting to that point.
So, Sarah, you are a best practice now. Please give us, with 2 words, what would be your main message?
We see that those countries have come a bit with on the mobile initiatives, have built capacity either internally or with a third party vendor. So it's about driving efficiency on the ground, really building an agile capability where you can adjust to whatever changes comes, and really have an end user engagement in the process.
Axel, what the market says?
This is really key, actually. I would really encourage you to, before starting any procurement, talking to the people who really are the end user, asking them what they really want to have, and also asking the industry what are their capabilities nowadays. Sometimes the knowledge is quite old in some procurement agencies. So this is, what industry would like to have. And of course, bring money.
Joao, you face the difficult conditions on the ground, as also the Swedish police. So what would be your main message?
So my key message would be that definitely mobile can drive efficiency. It is one of the enablers and part of that solution. I would have let's say, a toolkit approach to it. So also to build familiarity with its usage, and also let's not forget that migrants and asylum seekers, they do not have the basic things, and smartphones are not something that they exist in the hotspots, but they're not massively held. So that's something that we also need to account for.
Okay, so thank you very much for this interesting session. Thanks the audience for the active participation. So we have a break until 11:30, I think. Thank you.
Slowly. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tonu Tamer, and I am the moderator for our last and probably most exciting panel, which talks about delivering security through enhanced interoperability and analytics. We have with us today 4 very, very distinguished panelists who have a lot of experience in this field. First, I would like to introduce Andres Anvelt, who is a former architect of Estonian Information System and worked then in the Information Systems Authority of Estonia. And he will talk, among other things, about the Estonian X-Road, our experience and the vision on building it, and interconnecting the different IT systems and platforms. The next colleague is Mr. Brandon Murdoch. He comes to us from Microsoft. He's a partner on software engineer in the identity division, and he can really give us an insight to what a technology lead like Microsoft is doing in regards to an identity management. Then
Next in our distinguished list is Mr. Sergio Fernandez, who represents IATA. He's a regional director for airports and passenger and security in Europe. And he will try to give an overview on how the technology can actually help us, the little guy who wants to actually travel. We don't do it for the sake of doing it, but we do for the little guys, whether our own citizens or visitors. And last but not least, Mr. Martin Rubel, president of Guardtime, and he will talk about technology known as blockchain. And how this can deliver enhanced interoperability and analytics. So without further ado, I will ask Andres perhaps to make the key opening statement, please.
Right, thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here listening to the previous panel where people discuss things that actually happen on the field with their phones and the workstations and fingerprints and actual policemen wearing actual gloves. This is something that, as a software engineer, you don't get to sort of experience very often. We are confined to discussing abstract concepts within computing machines. So that's very refreshing. So it is really difficult to condense the Estonian experience of interoperability and security down into something that you can deliver as part of this sort of panel. I'm actually teaching a course for 5 hours on Saturday on this, but we don't have 5 hours. So where do we start? I think the good place to start is to identify that there are 2 problems usually with interoperability solutions. The first key problem is inception. How do you get this thing going? Because the experience shows that it is relatively easy to set up just a integration hub, just pile technology on top of the technology and just have it there. But it doesn't mean that it actually does anything. And the second part is adaptation. There is no way a government can keep up with the rate of social or technical change. It's just too difficult. Technology changes very often very fast. And so we would need to change as well. So how do we keep up? Luckily enough, nature has actually shown us a way to do that. If you think about this, ecosystems behave exactly like that. They get started very fast. If you bring a species to an island, they will breed rapidly, and there is going to be more of them until they reach a certain equilibrium with the food sources and so forth. And that's also a very adaptive, very dynamic system. And I mean, if you think about the story of Dr. Frankenstein, it's actually a very interesting story. To remember how the story got started, he had this minion called Igor, who has got him these body parts. And at least in the movie, I think in the book as well, the good doctor assembled the body parts on the stretcher, and that it was lying there, didn't do anything, until there was a spark, the lightning. Lightning struck, and after that, the monster took off. And nowhere in the story there is a scene where the good doctor is running behind the monster with a battery or turning a crank or something like that. This is something, from the government perspective, this is what you want. This is the sort of ecosystem or a feedback mechanism that you want to ignite in some ways. And with X-Road, this is exactly what happened with Estonia. Just to illustrate the abstract idea of ecosystems. See, with electronic identity, with many things, it's a chicken and egg problem, and interoperability is the same way. It makes no sense whatsoever for anybody to join your interoperability community to implement the standards or the APIs or what have you, if there's nobody already in the community. And there is nobody in the community because it makes no sense to join if you're the first one. It's like a fax machine. The first person who had a fax machine was really bored for the most of the time. It was a very useful, very useless piece of technology. So how do you get over that? Of course, how do you spark that ecosystem? And turns out that the analogy of providing a lightning to that piece of technology that's just sitting there is actually a very accurate metaphor. Because in Estonia, what we did, we made use of X-Road compulsory. Just with there's one act that says, if you're collecting any sensitive data about any citizen in Estonia, that information must be available to others via X-Road. No questions, no arguments, no ifs. It must be done. And what it created, it sort of kickstarted this ecosystem, because all of a sudden there was this flood of services available on that interoperability platform. And granted, because it was done by force, it was done sort of very, fairly robust manner, most of those services, actually not most, but many of those services were pretty useless. Let's face it, done just for the compliance sake. But it meant that if somebody started considering, I need to exchange this piece of information, or I need to get access to this piece of data, well, they might be on the X-Road. That might be available there. And so they went and joined, and the more people joined the X-Road, the more sense it made to provide your services on there, and the more sense it made to join. And you get this positive feedback loop. There has actually been research done, and what you get with X-Road message volume is you get this exponential growth. You get this explosion, exactly as you would in a natural ecosystem. So I think this is the key message here, that if we really want to build something that is secure, that is interoperable, that really sort of spans the entire community we are targeting, then we must look for ways to build those ecosystems, to ignite those ecosystems with whatever that is. Is it a legal action, or is it investment of finances, or whatever that is? We must find ways to create those ecosystems so that we get fast adaptation, fast adoption, and we get adaptive response. As the technology changes, we want to have the members of the ecosystem automatically react. We want the ecosystem to react to those changes as well. So yeah, that is the key message, I'd say.
Thank you very much to Andres. Before I pass the floor, maybe I have just two very concrete questions. Sure. First, why did Estonia actually decided that we need to implement interoperability? And the second question is, how did Estonians overcome the concerns on privacy when doing this?
I think the first decision was very simple. It is amazing what to do when you don't have anything. We didn't have the money to collect all the data and secure it in all those places. Therefore, we had to find a way to get to the data that lives in somebody else's database. It was literally as simple as that. It was just lack of resources. As to privacy, I would argue that sharing information actually greatly enhances privacy. Greatly. The thing is that let's assume that there's a society that doesn't share information between agencies. This inevitably means that all the agencies need to collect all the information they need for their purposes from the citizen. This means that instead of the data living in one place, the data is going to live in 50 places in Estonia, or in 5,000 places in case of, let's say, Germany, which is an actual country. Right, that actually has scale. And now, if you think about it, what are the chances of information leaking from 5,000 different databases? It's about 100%. One of those 5,000 databases is going to be broken into. It's just a fact of life. And that gets published, because that's a security incident. And the society goes, no, dear government, you're not even managing to hold on to your current data. No, you're not sharing anything. Which leads to even less information sharing, even better and even more high quality databases, even more copies of your data, which leads to even more information security issues and so forth. And I think if you manage to avoid that in the first place by doing interoperability, that keeps data exactly in one place, then you don't end up in that feedback loop of just distrust. And you actually enhance the user's privacy because these leaks do not happen.
Thank you very much to Andres for this. Then the next one I would like to ask to make an introduction is Mr. Martin Rubel to talk about blockchain and how that can be put into the context. And before I pass the floor, I have to say I looked at 5 different YouTube videos as a preparation for this to really try to understand what is this thing called blockchain. And I can't really claim that I fully understand. But at the same time, I don't fully understand how the plane works, but I still get on board, and I know it really delivers me from point A to point B. So maybe you can also give some insights to this.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and honored to be here. For your analogy on the plane, I think it's not the entirely appropriate one, because when you look at the blockchain videos, then you know, some of them look a little bit like magic, and you don't want to fly a plane that runs on magic. But you're absolutely correct. So blockchain obviously is a technological concept, right? So Bitcoin is most certainly a blockchain, but blockchain doesn't mean that it has to be a Bitcoin, right? And based on already only that, you're bound to find a number of different interpretations out there and so forth. And my sort of general recommendation would be to look at the problem that might be solvable with a blockchain. So that's probably the best thing to look videos about, not so much what it is. But anyways, blockchain is, in a nutshell, it's a database that is exceedingly hard to manipulate by any one party. So that's what it is. So there is a lot of buzzwords from distributed consensus to smart contracts to whatever, but essentially blockchain is a database that is exceedingly hard to manipulate by any one party, and it's exceedingly hard to manipulate by any one party because the whole thing, the entire database, is at many places at once, right? So it's continuously updated. There are many identical copies in many different places. And if somebody would like to do something funny with his instance of the database, everybody else would basically take a look at what you're doing and disagree, and your changes would be rejected. So it's safety in eyeballs, right? It's like an opposite of privacy. So the more people witness the blockchain, the more secure it is. So in privacy, the less people see your data, the more privacy you have. And what I would like to kind of argue is that even though this kind of opposite nature of widely witnessed blockchain and the need for privacy and confidentiality, these two concepts can actually exist together, and they can exist together in a way that actually advances the interoperability, advances the transparency from our society without sort of sacrificing our European core value, which is right to privacy. So yeah. I hope everybody's clear now what is a blockchain, right? So what you can do with a blockchain. So you definitely can build a global cryptocurrency with a blockchain. So that was demonstrated by Bitcoin back in already 2008. You don't need to have a sort of central governance for the cryptocurrency, and that was widely embraced by a number of sections within our society. It's definitely go-to currency for all sorts of illegal activities, and which has made it pretty much politically impossible to enforce for any use by the European member states or anybody else. Today's market cap for all the cryptocurrencies, I checked it this morning, is about $171 billion. That's like a combined market cap. Over 70% of that is today Bitcoin. Next comes Ethereum, and then there are like thousands of other cryptocurrencies out there. And each one of them is based on some kind of a blockchain, right? Again, that doesn't mean that blockchain necessarily needs to have a cryptocurrency involved with it. You don't need to really limit yourself to cryptocurrency for blockchain. So you can track any digital assets using the technology. It doesn't really matter. You can track insurance contracts and claims. You can track land records. You can track anything. So it's beautiful there. We mentioned smart contracts earlier. At what time it really got a lot of attention from the media in terms of it's promising to replace all sorts of governance. Basically, it's like internet hype all over again. We will cut out every middleman and enable the citizen to do everything by themselves. So yeah, this is probably not going to happen exactly like this, but it is certainly very, very interesting. And let's not forget the term smart contract is like, I think 2 or 3 years old. So it really came from with the Ethereum blockchain. So that was a big thing. But all this is really enabled by the most fundamental characteristics of the blockchain that we mentioned earlier, which is its ability to immutably assure the integrity of information stored on the blockchain. So this is actually the fundamentally the big thing there, because it's the first time in history you are able to verify the integrity of the information, integrity of data, any data, without relying on anybody or anything. You don't need to have any trust authority to say that this piece of information is actually correct one. So yeah, no. Yeah, you need to trust mathematics. That is true. That is true. But that's a kind of a different kind of a trust.
Again, true.
And actually having the formal proof for blockchains that you are using is number one requirement, really, because formal proof enables you to know under which conditions a particular cryptographic construct is actually valid. And when will it break? Because every cryptographic construct will break under some certain conditions. And if you don't have this understanding where are your limits, then you will run into problems. And there are blockchains out there that do have this formal proof. Most of them are not endorsed by Silicon Valley because creating a formal proof is an academic activity, extremely boring and extremely time-consuming. So typically, this is not something that helps in growing business. But when we talk about blockchain use in government, in defense, in kind of sensitive areas, then this is absolutely a must-have. So, where was I? Actually, I will wrap up. So again, just to leave you with 3 things. Blockchain is a technological concept. Never, ever confuse, please, blockchain with a Bitcoin, blockchain with Ethereum, blockchain with any other out of thousands of blockchains out there. Blockchain can and is used to provide traceability and integrity for the data sent from one database to another, no matter under whose control, no matter under which jurisdiction. It can be done, and it is being done right now. You don't need to sacrifice privacy or owner's right to be forgotten, which are big things in the Europe right now. And again, it is possible, and it is possible today. And thirdly, blockchain as a technology is already used in production systems to solve problems around data traceability, governance, integrity, instrumentation. Estonia, Andres can maybe talk about it a little more, but Estonia has been testing one flavor of blockchain technology since 2007 in order to enforce the integrity, not enforce, but in order to enable the integrity verification for its databases, for its registries, for the logs that actually record the usage of information stored in those registries. And it's been in production use since 2012. So if you need advice on how to use blockchain technologies in governments, there is no better place actually than Estonia to see what is going on. So, and there is really no need to invent the wheel, you know, as fun as it may sound, because there are like actual problems that can be solved and that are solved today using the blockchain technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Again, a couple of questions for me to understand, really. In my experience, I don't come across very often, at least on an EU landscape, where policymakers really talk about these new technologies or the benefits or demand the use of it. And do you think it's important that policymakers understand the benefits in order to ask them? Or is it even the matter of digital skills or the lack of it to be able to ask these questions?
Well, firstly, I have to agree with you and disagree. So it really depends with whom you're talking about. So if you read recent EU cybersecurity strategy, then one of the, I think, 2 or 3 technologies that was explicitly mentioned there was blockchain. So I'm a vice chair of the European Cybersecurity Organization. So we have been kind of involved in advising the creation of this strategy, and I do think that it's extremely important to for the lawmakers, for the executive branch to be aware of the new possibilities of the stage of different technologies that and especially the ones that have a potential for increasing the interoperability, which in European Union level is of utmost importance, because we are still talking about the member states, sovereign member states, who are running their own data, who are most likely reluctant to share things with their friendly next member state, and blockchain really can be used to enhance this cooperation quite extensively. So yes, I do think it's very, very important. When we go to the political level, so talking with the parliament members and so forth, of course, the understanding is at a completely different level, and it kind of has to be. So I think coming up with simple examples, simple use cases, going over and over is very important, because in the end it is going to be the European Parliament who is going to finally sign off any initiatives that the Commission may come up with. So yes, this is of course extremely important. Yes, this is already ongoing, and I think in the executive branch, the understanding for blockchain, amongst other very kind of emerging technologies, is already there.
Thank you very much, Martin, for this. May I ask Brandon to take the floor next, and then perhaps try to see how we can connect the identity that has been quite a key thing in this conference, and to put it as a platform into the blockchain, whether that can be done, and how Microsoft sees these developments from a technology lead's viewpoint.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to come and listen and learn for the last couple of days. You know, I think it's the first time Microsoft have actually been at this conference, and I've learned a lot and found it very interesting. And as Tano said, it's this thread of identity that seems to underpin all the conversations around interoperability, whether it be trying to ascertain the identity of somebody passing through the system, or if it's the identity of actually somebody operating and using the system. And for the next couple of minutes, I'd just like to share the learnings that we have seen as an organization as we've had this massive shift from the old world into the new cloud world. And how we see the paradigm changing from network-based security to this kind of new security model that we kind of refer to as my title says, identity as the control plane. So, we've seen major shifts in the enterprise IT landscape over the last few years. We've seen the move from centralized on-premise IT to these kind of decentralized nodes of compute, whether they exist within the cloud or within organizations that sit outside of your enterprise boundary. It's this shift from internally focused enterprise to perimeterless enterprise and perimeterless government. And again, change from platform to standards-based integration. And then from managing devices to actually governing devices. And this is the kind of shift we're seeing. And this has kind of led to this kind of concept. Identity is the new control plane. Identity is this transposable asset that can be moved around an enterprise, across an enterprise's boundaries, whether it be government or whatever, and allows this interconnected and productive nature. It needs to be secure. It also needs to be intelligent. So, how do we achieve this? Well, as an organization, the irony is not lost on me as a Microsoft person sitting up here talking about open standards. For a long time, I think we were not a positive advocate for them. But we have seen the light, and we've actually changed, and we're actually a very, very strong advocate. And I think some of the technology we're now delivering have benefited from that embracing of these standards. And especially within the identity security space, we see these wealth of standards coming out now. SAML 2 has been around for a while and is used heavily by governments. We see the OAuth 2 authorization framework, and there's OpenID Connect, which allows identity to be shared across that OAuth framework, and works well with sort of the modern mobile working that we're seeing. There's open data, which is a standard for sharing and defining common data sets. And we see SCIM, which is a cross-domain identity management and provisioning protocol. So all these things are starting to gather pace. We're very involved in them. We work with our industry colleagues such as Google and Amazon to actually help drive these standards forward. And we as a company and some of the technologies we've built around the identity space have benefited from these standards. Looking at these things here, there's a wealth of cloud identity providers. We have a whole lot of other federation services and capabilities that we're now able to interop with and actually provide these complex identity matrices that we see and are needed. That ranges from reaching out to cloud services, to on-premise services, to leveraging blockchain, to leveraging Active Directory, whatever that underlying technology is. Those standards have driven that interoperability and capability that our customers have demanded and asked from us. And I think it comes to an acknowledgement that we can't solve all identity problems as a single organization. To solve identity takes collaboration across multiple entities and multiple organizations. And open standards drive that conversation and drive that goal. SCIM's a relatively new protocol. It's used for integrating provisioning and managing identities across different systems. The benefit to us as Microsoft, we have a huge demand to be able to turn around and be agile, which is not something we always were. Adopting these standards has helped us actually integrate with the likes of Facebook, Slack, Workplace, and there are dozens of them, far quicker. We can actually now integrate with these large entities in a secure, reliable, scalable manner in less than 6 weeks. And actually, that as we invest and we do this more and more, that time is coming down. And we've benefited from it. People are now moving to our platform, they see the benefits of it, and that's all down to us adopting and participating and driving these open standards, especially around the identity space. We talk about identity, it needs to be secure, it needs to be it's strong, and it needs to be frictionless as well. We need to reduce the burden that identity is pushing onto people. And there are new technologies coming out. We've already heard somebody in the audience spoke earlier about FIDO and the initiatives around FIDO. This is reducing that friction. We know passwords are in an untenable position. Moving to stronger authentication is a definite must, but they add additional friction. But there's interesting technology coming along now that actually brings that quality and strength of authentication, but reduces the friction and the burden that it carries. And we're starting to see a lot of adoption, especially within the government space, but also within large enterprises. Again, that's another great standard that we have adopted and are driving. Our ambition is to 1 billion identities without passwords, right? On any device, on any OS, on any browser. And that takes a concerted effort, that takes intent. And that takes working with other organizations, like Google, like Amazon, and lots of the smaller, innovative identity practitioners that are out there, such as GuardTime, to bring these capabilities to bear and to create an identity ecosystem that allows people to model their identity requirements and deliver these capabilities, whether they be directly to consumers or to citizens or to employees or pan-border employees working in these environments. One of the advantages that we've seen about building this cloud capability is the intelligence that it brings, the adaptive learning and the real-time mitigation around identities. And we talk about, in terms about having this intelligent security graph, being able to see how identities flow and are used across various systems allows us to actually make determinations around how to deal with that identity. Now, it doesn't also mean that you see identity that's being used out of context. Maybe it's not in its geolocation. Doesn't mean you block the authentication. The intelligent thing to do is actually add additional hurdles for them to overcome and still allow them to get on with their work if they can pass those. So I put this up there. It's just interesting, we have 14 billion authentications a day. We share information across the Microsoft Digital Crimes units across the world. We also work with law enforcement and security researchers. We're also very involved with stuff that comes from the dark web to understand how these identities are changing, how they're being used. And we're using machine learning to now drive this protection, to understand how identities are being compromised, how identities are being leveraged and pivoted to access other systems out of the norm. And here's just an example of some of the thinking that goes behind this. The ability to adapt to the environment and to how that identity is being used in its context, in the environment it's being used, and on the device. And this now has led to a whole lot of very interesting conditional access controls that we have that allow us to actually, in the old days it used to be if you couldn't enter your password, you were blocked. You had to call an admin, you had to move forward, you weren't able to go about your business. That adds friction to the process, that blocks business and actually stops workers from being productive. So bringing in these access controls, these policy controls allows us to be adaptive and gives strength and security to the process, but also doesn't get in the way of the business process, which is fundamental to what it is, because in reality, it's not about the technology, it's about the outcome of the people in the field. So, as an organization, we've heard interoperability, and I think people talk about interoperability. There is a technical aspect to it, but for us as an organization, interoperability was a cultural change, and that's come from the top. Satya Nadella has driven this growth mindset, this open mindset to continually learn and embrace change. Change comes. It comes quicker than we know what to do with it. And if you're not prepared and open to change, you end up with these large, high friction, stale systems that just cannot evolve. So, we as an organization have designed for change. We look forward to change and we embrace it. And that means we have to think about this perimeterless government, perimeterless enterprise, heterogeneous environments. And that gives us the ability to be agile and transparent about what we're doing. There was also an acknowledgement that it's billions of devices now. It's not single identities, it's not a phone here or there. It's going to be cars, it's going to be devices that people are using. It's how systems interact with each other. And that brings a very, very different mindset and approach. And I think one that we've seen it work successfully for Microsoft in the identity division where I am, but across the organization as a whole. It means we're having very different conversations with people that aren't about technology, they're about the outcomes that they're trying to achieve as a government, as an organization, as a startup, whatever it is. And these are the architectural imperatives we work to. And I think there's a lesson in here. I mean, we're not the only ones doing this. I think it would be arrogant to think that. We know I've got colleagues at Amazon and at Google and you name any of the big cloud providers and other innovative software. They're all starting to think in these terms, right? Open standards, interconnected. Think about infinite scales. We have to now. We talk about trust frameworks and user journey. So putting the user at the heart of technology, of the experience, not the actual technology. And that governs kind of what we do. And I guess the last kind of thing, we as an industry work together, but I think people who are sort of using, consuming, and working with us as well need to start to think about open standards and actually bring them to the front as we think about technology. And look at these things. There's FIDO, there is the stuff that's coming out the IETF. Think about these, bring them into the conversations that you're having. This is what helps interoperability. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a bootstrap here, right? In order to achieve interoperability, you need strong identity. But actually, to have strong identity and an identity system that works, you need interoperability. So, that's, as an industry, we're starting to try to address some of these things to bring that interop to the identity layer that can actually underpin all these interop and data flows that you need and depend on, and allow these new scenarios to light up. So, yeah. That's what, I mean, for me, the big takeaway is that interoperability is as much cultural and mindset of the people who are entering as technology. In fact, I think it's more important than the technology. I think the technology is there now. It's about the people building and creating these systems. It's that mindset they bring to the solution.
Thank you very much to Brandon. As interoperability, at least to me, is partly breaking silos, or at least creating the formula where 1 + 1 equals more value than simply 2. Would you then say that it makes sense to consider integrating government-level ID management with a private sector one? And do you think that this would work? Would it work technically, and also would it work politically?
I think technically it can work, and we've done it already. I think there is, there are political winds of change coming, and I think it will get that way. I think, the private sector can't solve all identity problems, and I don't think government and public sector can solve all identity problems. I think it's going to take collaboration between the two to actually create some sort of, process and understanding to achieve that overall. And you know what? Even doing that collaboratively, we're not going to solve it. We're going to have to be adaptive. We're going to have to learn. We're going to have to evolve as technology comes out, as new paradigms start to appear. Blockchain being a big one of those, right? Or distributed ledgers, or permission distributed ledger, whatever the flavor is. Those things are evolving. So the standards and the capabilities and the platforms we build need to be able to take these things into account. And I don't think government's necessarily in a position to do that, but I don't think private sector is as well. Private sector can be a bit more agile and can lead, but it needs to work closely with government.
Okay, thank you very much for this insight, Brandon. And can I now ask our next panelist, Mr. Sergio Fernandez, to try and put all this, perhaps a bit technical talk together. How would this create the value to the little guy, whether our own citizens or our visitors?
Okay, thank you very much. As you mentioned, I'm in IATA, so I'm not going to talk about technology, and I'm going to talk about data. I'm going to try to bring the passenger view on that, and how we could ensure a seamless passenger experience while improving security. So I'm not going to, I guess you are familiar with IATA, so just two numbers. We represent more than 260 members and more than 85% of the global air traffic. One of the questions when we were talking about interoperability and security, for me, is why? Why we need to enhance interoperability to have better security? And for us, the answer is clear, is we have more than 28,000 flights departing and landing in Europe on a daily basis. That means more than 941 million passengers flying to, from, or within Europe. But that's not the main problem. The problem is that the passenger traffic is expected to double in the next 20 years. And current systems are not using any kind of digitalization, all the digitalization and interoperability opportunities to process those passengers in a smooth way, in a secure way, while ensuring we are able to stop the bad guys. So, what's the issue? If we don't do anything, we will have long queues that, apart from being a burden from the passenger, are risky places. We know, and sadly we have some incidents where we all agree that landside security is important, so we need to move and to control a lot of people in a very short time and put them in a secure place. So what is the vision? Our vision is we need to provide passengers with an end-to-end experience that is secure, seamless, and efficient. And that's why moving into the digital world and interoperability play a key role. Just to give you a simple example about the current travel process, and for the sake of time, I'm going to just to focus on three points. Let's imagine, for instance, the pre-travel step. So before you travel, some passengers need to have visa, need to have travel authorizations, they need to have fulfill different information in order to enable airlines to share this information with different authorities. This requires manual intervention, and as discussed yesterday, manual intervention, people entering manual information means errors. And this is what we try to avoid. Yesterday during dinner we were discussing about a research that one of the IATA members did about the validity of the API information that was sent versus the real information that is stored in the passport. So they were able to find that more than 60% of the information that they were transferring with API data was wrong. Not because it was done on purpose, but because, okay, mistakes or not mistakes, because some people are having two different passports, so are entering information from one passport and then traveling with another one. So this is a big mistake. One of the things that passengers want is to be able to move away to process in the airport and being able to take some of the activities outside the airport. So that means, what if I'm able to validate all my documentation prior to the travel, even doing the check-in and having my bag picked at home? In this case, we need to have interoperability and to move into the digital world where everybody is able to share information, everybody is able to share and to have access to the specific information required for specific purposes. For instance, one of the biggest concerns from the passengers and will create a big frustration for them is the security checkpoint. When you go to an airport, it's the same process for all of us in all different airports. So one size fits all. Does not increase security. If you are able to have advanced passenger information, means that you are able to have advanced risk profile. That means that you're able to have risk-based differentiation. So sharing this information at the security checkpoint means that you can ensure that the right resources are focusing on the right people. The same happens with the border control is, if you are able to share advanced information and you're able to have a profile of the passenger before entering into the airport, when you go to the border control, you don't need to validate anything, just done the risk analysis that was done previously. So, go, no go. Yesterday, the colleague from Frontline was mentioning the letter that IATA issued to the European Council of Ministers, because we need to ensure that we balance the security with efficiency. Because one without the other create big mess. So how to move forward? The process needs to be holistically driven. You know, I was very, I would say, frustrated yesterday when we were talking about silos are good. Silos are not good. And when in a silo environment, 1 + 1 is not 2. It's less than 2, because you have duplications, you have redundancies, you need to do things to validate that everybody is talking together. And in the same language and with the same information. We need to move an environment that each one is specialized in one specific part, and we can complement each other to ensure that limited resources that we have are used in the best way. That's good for passengers, that's good for airlines, and good for governments. Interoperability is a must. we were talking about sharing information between states. It's not even between states. Yesterday was discussed is between different agencies in the states. So we are used to share information to different agencies with different frequencies, with different platforms, and they don't talk to each other, even within the same state. So it's a must that agencies talk to each other. It's a must that agencies go beyond their local boundaries and even share information with other stakeholders outside their country. It needs to be cost efficient, cheap for passengers, and cheap for authorities as well. We need to ensure that it's safe, secure, and seamless for passengers, and need to be based on collaboration and information sharing. Is the only way. What are the key success factors if we want to have this improved passenger experience while improve security? We need to reduce repetitive identity checks, repetitive manual intervention, repetitive transmission to different parties. So we need to change the way that we manage passenger data. This idea of sharing information between the stakeholders is a must. There is no other way to move forward. So we have tried to collect this in 3 key initiatives on 3 main topics. First of all is the passenger information in a single window. You know, we have PNR directive, we are sharing information of PNR, we are going to share information about API, then you have the exit entry system and the TIAS. 4 different systems, 4 different frequencies, 4 different data sets about the same passenger. Are we able to have single window when we send information there to the competent authority disseminate the subset of information that is required by the different parties in order to do their work, and we can do this in advance to ensure that the process in the airport is smooth, fast, and secure? That's one of the ideas of the one identity. The concept of I have my identity validated in a single token. Some guys, or some colleagues talk about the famous envelope. So if my identity, my travel documentation, and all the authorization is validated at the beginning of my travel, why can I go to the airport or to the plane? And this information is shared to the different stakeholders, authorities, ground handler, IT suppliers, to do their part, around the value where they can do more. And then the other initiative that we think that is key is linked to the Smart Security initiative that we launched with ACI, and is how to improve the security checkpoint. Again, we are all treated the same when we go to the security of an airport. The minister, the policeman, the crew. So we are wasting resources to check people that are secure instead of investing those resources in the people that are not so secure, or we don't know information about them. So again, if we send passenger information in advance, we do the risk profile in advance, risk assessment in advance, and we share this information, for instance, in the security checkpoint. When 2 people go to the airport, the security checkpoint will be able to recognize who is who and apply different algorithms, different filters, and different security checks to ensure that more time and more complexity is put into the bad or unknown guys than to the frequent travelers, safe and secure passengers. So that's all from now.
Thank you very much to Sergio for this presentation. What is your impression when you interact with travelers? Do you think they support the efforts that governments are trying to make in order to improve checks? But I think it's also the intention of the governments not to slow down the traffic.
To be completely honest with you, I don't think that passengers really understand. One of the things that we were discussing yesterday during dinner is that, first, passengers think that the government has more information than what the government has. So they take for granted that they know everything. That's the first conclusion that they have. The second one, and this is just, we launched a yearly survey to more than 70,000 passengers in order to collect the feedback. And the second point is that more than 85% of the passengers will be willing to share more information if that helps them in order to have a smooth process. So when passengers are stuck in immigration or in the security checkpoint more than 10 minutes, it's a mess. It destroys totally the travel experience. So they understand that, and they will be willing to share more information, but say, guys, do your job. I don't have a problem sharing my data, but do your job and ensure that you put the effort on the wrong guys and you allow me to go quick through the different checkpoints into the airport, because I'm frequent traveler, I'm secure, I give you all my data, you have all this information about, because Big Brother is out there, so why I need to stop there? And going back to this famous letter that was mentioned yesterday, this is the best example of the lack of interoperability. How we can share advanced passenger information in some countries, and when you go to the border control, the same passenger needs to be again passport swap and validated again versus the same databases. It's nonsense, and the passengers don't understand that. Sorry.
Thank you for being so honest. Now I'm looking towards our audience. I've asked already a couple of questions from our panelists. Do you think that we deserve some more scrutinizing questions and then hopefully some inspiring answers? Please.
Thank you. Radovan Shida from the Council Secretary. I've got a very, probably extremely naive question for the last speaker, Mr. Fernandez. Is it in today's world conceivable that we have a differentiated approach for the 85% who would be willing to share more information, and we let them go quickly and then just let the 15 remaining percent get stuck for more than 10 minutes? Is it something we can remotely think of, or do we just need in today's legal environment just one approach for everybody to avoid
No, that's a very good question, and you know, I'm not talking about futuristic, I'm talking about real things that are happening now in some countries. So we are not talking even to decrease the level of security to this 85%. The point is that for this 85% that they are sharing this information, the current system could spend less controls. Not less controls. Sharing information, the controls could be done much in advance, so they need to spend less time into the process. So if this 85% spend less time, means that the 15% remaining also need to spend less time, because there is no queue, there are no people there in front of them that are safe and secure. So there are pilots out there, and you will find them into the press, and we are working in some very good initiatives about how to implement all of that in some airports and even in the security checkpoint to ensure that the time is spent into the risky guys. And to give you again an example is, a guy that is in the security checkpoint spends the same time checking a bag with nothing than a bag that contains food or contains a lot of packed things. So our point is, okay, the technology is out there. If the technology is out there and is able even to, you have scanners now that are able to clear the image without the need of the screener to check. So if the technology is there, use it, ensure that all the parties are sharing the information to ensure that these 85% that are willing to share information could go smoothly, and then we focus on the 50%. And even for this 50%, we will be able to have or we expect to be able to have this process in less than 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for the question, and I think a very comprehensive answer. We have another question over here.
Thank you, Dan Bachnummer from Accenture. I just wanted to follow up on that, because I prescribe to the one identity concept, but to the previous question, I have one identity from the US. I'm a German registered traveler, I'm a UK registered traveler, so I have one identity per organization. So this concept of one identity and safe and secure, seamless travel, it goes back to the previous conversation about how do I establish trust with that entity that's going to seamlessly and securely get me through this. So this concept of one identity I get, but I have one identity per organization, per relying party.
Yeah, again, very, very good point. And this is something that demonstrates the need of collaboration and sharing information. You're totally right. And unfortunately, most of the pilots that are running now in order to have this one identity reality or this identity concept as working in different states with partnership between airlines, airports, Minister of Justice, Home Affairs, but are state-driven. There is nothing, and that's unfortunate, that connect the dots between the different countries, and that's the biggest concern. That's why we are encouraged, the European Commission, even to move into that new idea that you don't need to have three identities in three countries. You are just one, with some attributes, with some travel information, and that's the information that everybody needs to share, independently if you are departing from UK, from France, or from Estonia.
So, and you're slightly provocative here. If that gentleman would have shared his social security number with all of those three parties, there would be a way to actually link these identities, right?
Yeah. But the point is that we don't even want to share this identity with the three parties. The real vision and the real concept is that your identity is stored in one place. And the three different entities, when they need the information, they look for that, but only the information that they need.
Absolutely.
In this case, for instance, the security number is so for traveling not needed. But
just reflecting on that, that would basically mean that whoever issues the sort of fundamental identity, let's say the US government, would make available an API against which you can actually incur in a transparent fashion, so the gentleman can check later what was shared.
Yeah. This is with the ambition of EIDAS and several of the pan-government things around having a single source of identity that can be used and amplified by.
Yeah. If only there was a technology that allows that.
There is a technology that allows that, but I think there is also a question about data ownership. So in terms of having free identities, I mean, it should be. You should have one identity, and you should give access to whoever needs that.
Exactly.
And also this is obviously a topic not only in airline travel or border crossing. So it's in the financial passports for KYC, AML, these kinds of issues. So I think there will be pretty interesting. Well, there are pretty interesting kind of proof of concept solutions, but I think something will make sense very soon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Axel Görlich. I had another question. The holistic approach was mentioned. We have here just traveling as an airline traveling. And all the collection of data is actually because of there's a mandate to collect all this information. But it's just true for the airlines. To have really holistic approach, what about the other ways to cross the border? For example, land borders, ferries, even cruise ship. If we forget to talk about this and just focus on the airports and making traffic on these borders even faster, we forget the rest of it. So I don't know if really the audience maybe can answer to that.
Well, I can answer from the airline point of view, and it's something that we don't really understand. Why? If I'm, for instance, moving by car from Spain to France, I don't need to share any kind of information, I don't have any kind of stop. But if I take a flight from Madrid to Paris, I need to share this information. But if I go by bus or by train, this information is not required. So my question will be, why the aviation sector required to share this information about the passenger information and the other sectors are not? So for my point of view, is all those sectors, at the end, we are talking about security and cross-border, need also to share information. And if you don't have this interoperability and single window concept, it's going to be a mess. You as a passenger cannot use, depending on the mode of transport, different tools, different processors, different identification, because you are not going to have 3 identities, you are going to have 100, and all of them completely different. I told you before, from the information that the passengers put into the airline website to the real information that was collected when the real passport was swapped, more than 60% of mistakes. Let's imagine this multiply different states, different entities, different modes of transport. Completely mess. So again, and going back to yesterday's discussion, silos is not a good approach. It's not a good approach. So we need to add on the strength of each party and try to remove all the unnecessary steps and redundancies in the system.
Just commenting on that previous story on the 3 identities, that's an excellent example of how lack of interoperability actually endangers privacy. Because all of a sudden now 3 organizations have access and store your personal data as opposed to just one.
Mm-hmm. Actually, coming back to the answer that you made before, that going from Spain to France by land transport means no stopping or no sharing the data. Unfortunately, we see at least in few cases in Europe internally where the person is still stopped in order to indeed collect the data. And wouldn't the answer then be to try and perhaps through the use of more data to run the checks so that the traveler doesn't even understand that those checks are run, other than to stop them physically, stop everyone in a queue, and then...
Yeah, don't get me wrong, we are completely against stopping anyone. Completely against. We think that if you have one identity, at the end, we are one individual. So there is only one identity. There are not 3, 5, 100. You are one individual, and you are sharing your information. Then, depending on where you are, how you are identified, in some cases, in some airports and in other places, you are identified biometrically, this information is there if people are able to share. So I'm not willing to, I'm not promoting stopping people, just the opposite is use the information, and as you have the information, do the risk analysis, do the risk assessment, and whoever is going to a train station, and you identify using the biometric technology, for instance, this passenger, you have done already your job before, and you know if this guy is risky or not. So you don't need to stop to do a risk assessment. Do your homework before.
Okay.
Yes, so I really like the vision. So you walk down the street and, you know, you're a known person, right? So I'm not entirely sure I like your vision. But you know, this is happening with, for example, drug detection. So you have the trace detectors everywhere, and essentially you know what is going on. So with advances in, you know, machine learning, AI, stuff like that. So it is entirely plausible that every passenger in the airport, in the, you know, Spain-France border is actually identified without them knowing about it. But then we run into the next question, which is how is this information used? How the citizen is able to, you know, be aware of how the information is used and what is going on inside of the government systems.
But I mean, the eIDAS is there. It's there. It's interoperable European electronic identity. Mm-hmm. So why can't I buy my ticket logging in with my Estonian ID card using the eIDAS infrastructure to Lufthansa? Yep. Lufthansa receives nothing but my identification code. Everything else I enter manually. And I go to the airport, I stick my card in some kiosk, enter my PIN code, again authenticating myself, and I'm free to go. It's actually way more secure than somebody looking at my ID card. No, the infrastructure is all there.
No, I absolutely agree, but I think the question was different. The question was about identifying you without you being aware that you are being identified.
No, but in that sense, and you know, we have even suppliers here that are working on identification of the passenger on the move. So if you are identified or you are enrolled at the beginning of your passenger journey, you can identify, okay, you have now automated boarding gates, you have self-boarding gates that, looking at your face, they identify yourself. And they know if you have the travel document information valid, your passport is valid, the information is valid, so technology is there, and the pilots are already there. The big problem from my point of view is that the chain management and this idea of, yes, we are so special and so experts, and our information is so confidential that we cannot share. Hey guys, from a passenger point of view, I'm giving you all my details as an airline. And you are giving all the details because there is no filter to the authorities. So, what information is so secret?
Actually, my point was that today in this process, I get identified multiple times. And each time I hope I realize that I'm being identified. Instead of doing it once, knowing that this data could be used for multiple reasons, and then perhaps I don't then realize on what all those reasons are, but provided they are there by law, everyone can audit, can double check, etc., then we are still delivering what we do today, but only perhaps in a transparent manner.
And of course, I completely support Andres in a notion that we do have the technology in place. So to actually do that, so all this future kind of developments, this is like fun and science fiction, and we will get there at one point. But right now we do have a technology to actually streamline this entire process considerably. And when you add sort of the blockchain layer on top of that, you are able to also get independent mathematic kind of a transparency into the how this data is being used, who is processing it, how, without actually revealing any private data.
That's actually a very good point, because in the GDPR regulation that comes in force in the matter of months, there is a particular requirement that you have to let know the data subject if their data has been misused within 72 hours. So that's a very, very small time frame, and you need to put in, it's there.
Yeah, but you won't, like, what was the timeline of the latest large Equifax hack? 5 months when they learned about that incident?
No, actually the average for between the breach of the system and the discovery of the breach is about 205 days nowadays. Yeah. That's 7 months. Wow. So that's like global average. So
that is going to magically just bloop.
Well, there's going to be a lot of fines.
Well, I guess that you need to add those 5 days to the 271 or whatever.
That is true, actually, because that starts from the discovery of the breach, not from the breach.
Any more questions from the audience? We have a gentleman at the back.
Thank you. Kieran Carolyn from EU LISA. I have a question related a little bit about governance, I suppose. So, principle that Brandon elaborated very much as we're moving from centralized to decentralized, and this is very much in keeping with the ideas of blockchain, etc. And one of the focus, I suppose, the application focus of this panel is very much on the airline passenger. So I'm trying to bring this together and think about something like risk analysis that has been advocated by Sergio, to say that we have a lot of different information sources, a lot of different information owned by different parties that should be shared and be made interoperable. And I think many of us in this room would agree that that's a nice principle. But nevertheless, this data is owned by different parties. Some of them are public government, some of them are private entities. And in order to have the full picture, you need to share this. And the question I really have is, who, in the case of airline data, is IATA expecting? And generally, maybe to the other panelists, it's the same question, whether they're talking about adaptive access control, like Brandon spoke about. Who is going to drive this when it's a completely decentralized system? Who is going to take charge and say, I am going to implement the standards and I'm going to implement the framework? to make sure that this data is shared and accessible to the airlines, to the security, to the government, etc.? Is it the government that should take responsibility, the private companies, or who's going to stand up and say, okay, I'm going to do this? Or who do you expect to do it?
Andres? I would like to stand up and say I'm going to do this, but I'm not with the government anymore. So I think the government should really pick this up. But I was really wondering about your statement about the data being owned by different parties. Like, the data is still owned by the subject, by the person. Like, my personal data is my data. I can do whatever the hell I want with it. So if I consent to my information being shared, the airline might not like it, but it's my consent is there. So
we have 3 colleagues from the private sector. Do you believe that the government should be in lead in this?
I think government have to be involved in the conversations. I think it needs to be led by the private sector. From our point of view, as a cloud operator, in order to foster trust and transparency in the cloud, we need to solve these problems. We need to be clear. We need to work with other operators to actually provide this kind of capability. And there are initiatives around shared signaling and protocols and conventions that are coming to. I think this is where blockchain is going to provide a really strong portion of that cloud governance. But I think it needs to be led by the private sector, and I think government need to provide oversight and regulation on that.
Which is actually a very good position, because that is a really good basis for cooperation.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Martin?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask which government? I mean, when we talk about the government. So when we talk about things that span like different jurisdictions and geographies, then it is very kind of hard to imagine that there will be a government everybody else will rally around.
But I mean, every government can take one small step and say, look, guys, this is the way about Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, German, French, whatever citizens, this is the way you can access what information I can share. If you can jump through these hoops and you are authorized to actually do that, and these are the transparency measures. Here you go. This is something that every government can do independently, and from that, an agreement as to how that mechanism should work.
Exactly. I think what is important is that there is this, what is the main topic of this panel, interoperability, kind of a framework that allows those governments who have decided to actually do something in the space to talk with other governments.
Right. But this is the chicken and egg problem again.
We have solved them before.
But I also think there is we are, this room, we're part of that 1%, right, that understand the problem space, understand about privacy and consent. How do we help the general populace change their mental model? They need to understand the implications of consenting to that, and that's still something very, very difficult to get across. We look at the whole Facebook conundrum, right? And people don't quite understand that they are the product. And we have to actually start to have those conversations and start to get that into people's minds so they understand before these systems will actually...
This is why I specifically mentioned the trust in the blockchain. I'm not wanting to interrupt, but it is really strange what people do trust and what they don't. And that is very much down to the general public's perception, which is very difficult to change in some ways. If the population decides that they don't trust something...
I know we're seeing interesting stuff. There's a couple of industry colleagues talk about the API of me, and it's amazing what people are willing to give up when they actually can see and benefit, and they can see the value they get from giving up that information.
And they can happily sort of subscribe to the fact that their personal data is very private at the same time. Yes. And that's just how people are.
Yep. No, just answering the questions is, I will love the government to drive this, any government, but government pace is not the same that the private sector, unfortunately. And we have the real problem of passenger stack, the real problem of passenger doing duplicated process, the cost of that management. So even we will love the government to drive this, we are more than happy with those governments that came to us and say, guys, we have an issue, what could you propose? And in the few cases in Europe where those pilots are running, the government is really involved and really engaged, and that's very good. But at the end, they are not driving because they see the benefit, but they don't see the sense of urgency. For them, it's not an issue now. For us, it is. It's a matter of survival. It's a matter of moving passengers quickly. So,
I can see a future where there's a license to travel.
Yeah,
that would be.
Yeah, no,
I can get it with my national ID or whatever, but I now have this thing that's sanctioned by the airlines that I can just present in.
And again, when you're talking about trust, I'm giving the information to the airline, and I'm trusting this information is used through the process. So if I'm giving you my information 1 month even before I travel, why I need to stop in the airport and somebody need to look at my face, look at my passport, swap, and validate if I'm a bad guy or not. I sent my information 1 month ago, and even 24 hours before it's already sent.
So we have another question.
So Dan again from Accenture. So even if we move past identity and the data sovereignty, I opt in and provide my identity and I control that. Fine, but going back to API and PNR and what Kieran was talking about was the risk assessment. I don't own my police record. I don't own my risk. That's one of the reasons why I have multiple identities. I was chief engineer for Global Entry for a number of years. I'm in Global Entry because the US government did a risk assessment. In order for me, and I could join the Canadian Trusted Traveler Program, but in that case, the US will provide to the Canadians my risk assessment. I don't own that risk assessment. So there's one thing about my face is my passport, and yes, I know this is Dan Bockenheimer, and I could own that just like as Frank was talking about in my e-passport. I could present my e-passport and provide that identity information. I could do the same with blockchain. But the other half of the seamless and secure is what is my risk assessment? I don't own that. My home country and my destination country defines risk, and that's why there's API and PNR. And why isn't it on land border? Because transportation security says if I'm going to stuff 300 people in an airplane, I want to know that these people aren't going to increase risk in that public conveyance. In my own car, no, or even in most buses, some vessels, there is a manifest. So I don't own my risk. I own my identity.
No, I absolutely agree with you. The point is not that you manage your risk. My point is that you share your information and somebody is doing the risk. Several people and several entities are doing the risk assessment. So my point is that if I'm sharing my information, do your work, do the risk assessment, and when I'm going through the process, you don't need to validate the full risk assessments. You need just to tell me, green, you go, red, you are stopped. So you don't need to validate again in one step versus 2 watch lists, in another step, my criminal records, in another steps, what was my travel trend of if I'm coming from Syria or from Turkey or from any hotspot. So the point of that is, I share my information, each one of the entities. So I share my information once. This information is shared to specific entities that they do their own risk assessment. And between all of them, they share, go, no go. From the airline point of view, we don't need to know who you are. We don't need to know if you are risky or not. We need to know you can fly, you cannot fly.
In the ideal world, actually, I wouldn't, as a passenger, I wouldn't even share any information with you. I would just share this one identity based on which you can access US, Canada, whatever risk assessments in a way that I can actually log in later somewhere and go, this is the list of pieces of information that was shared about me. I don't even need to know what my risk assessment is. I just know that somebody from that organization looked at that.
You know, in fact, this is also that we all advocate and it's happening in some countries. The passengers sharing the information directly is where you ensure that the information is right. We were discussing yesterday dinner that before about this mismatch between the passenger information that is shared by the airline to the authorities and the real information. So, if you have an intermediary, it could be an airline or it could be a travel agent. A travel agent that is selling a package, hotel, cruise, a flight for 200 euros, they don't care too much about the information that they're putting and it's going to be shared with the state. They care about closing the deal quickly because it's a full package. It's not just a ticket. It's a full package. So that's why you find a lot of Mickey Mouse's information in the API information that is shared by the travel agents to the community. So if you also give the responsibility to the passenger, they will have the ownership, they will know what information they are sharing with the state, and they will ensure that the information is the proper one.
But I think in order for these kind of things to be successful as well, we need to acknowledge that we're very good at collecting data. We actually need to provide, to build trust in these sort of systems, we need to be able to allow the individual that's impacted when it goes wrong, because it will go wrong at some stage, to be able to recuse and actually rectify the situation. And I don't think we're very good at that. I know GDPR is trying to go towards that, but I think we have a lot of work to do as an industry and as a body to actually to figure that out and actually build that trust and transparency within the systems we're now standing up.
Thank you. The lady in the middle, please.
Hi, Runa Franklin from Deloitte. Question about the single token identity, because it gets talked about a lot, especially in airports, that you have the same identity token that takes you through security, takes you through border control, etc. But you still have to register to create that identity. Is that what you're saying? So in order for me to have a verification ID, I would still have to present some documentation to create that travel token ID?
Yeah.
At some point. So there is still sharing of information.
Not necessarily.
Okay, but the other part is that the process and the infrastructure varies from travel port to port. So whether it's an airport, it can be different from airport to airport in the same country. So you can have different security rules. So I'll use the UK as example. You can have different security rules in Gatwick that you could to Heathrow because it's dependent on how the port operator translates it and decides to impose it. And then you have different rules depending on the mode. So you've talked about land and about the fact that you're not having to present the API, but then you're traveling in your own vehicle and you can appear at every time. You don't have to book exactly rail. So there's no checking on rail, but you don't have to book a time to cross the land border, you will appear. So the last minute point of that kind of travel also needs to take into account. So I hear what you're saying, but I think the discussion is also then wider, which it comes back to the infrastructure point and then the country of origin point, because the rules leaving Heathrow this week, I saw a sign saying if you are traveling to the US, you have to go through a different security procedure because their rules have changed. So this lack of standardization and the interpretation of security rules is also something that needs to be considered.
But if I may just two comments. The first one is you're totally right. The idea of the single token needs an enrollment to validate your identity. So somebody needs to validate your identity. Hopefully in the future, one government, even using blockchain, will identify the identity, and it will be available to anyone. Nowadays, you need to enroll. That's clear. You need to enroll. They need to have, in some airports, the picture of your face, your biometric information, the information from your passport, and then when you go, the next week or the next day, with your with your ticket, this information is already there. What I don't agree is about what you talk about the infrastructure. The security rules are the same. What's happening in London Heathrow now regarding the US is happening in all European airports. The US issue an emergency amendment with new security requirements for all airports and airlines flying to the US. So it's the same. Nothing has changed. See, if you're flying from Paris to the US, you need to follow the same procedures. Unfortunately. No, I'm telling you, I'm the responsible of security of IATA, so it's something what we were discussing. So in this case, a specific case, the emergency amendment is the same. But on top of that is the information that the airline is collecting nowadays into their system in order to share the API data is the same independently on where you fly. So if you are buying a ticket in British Airways, the web page that you need to fulfill with your personal data is the same if you fly to Hong Kong, to US, it's the same. So if you have the same information in the website, why don't, when you enroll, ensure that this information is the one that is stored, independently of what is the airport. Unfortunately, also, the pilots that we are having nowadays with this single token are just, I think, 4 or 5 worldwide. So still, airports like Manchester or Paris are not even thinking about this single token process, unfortunately.
So I think, okay, a very last quick question, please.
Sorry, Charles de Quessin, ID partner. I'm coming from the airline industry and I'm very familiar with the API and PNR. And I've been working for the French government on the PNR project, on the ID card, and I'm very familiar on both sides, government and airline industry. I just wanted to come back to the question of the colleague, about who is responsible for this risk assessment. We should come back to the directive, that's the basis. If you look at the directive, we have one PIU, Passenger Information Unit per country. And the PIU designed what we call a competent authority. And we could have different competent authority. That could be the border, it could be the checkpoint, it could be the customs as well. The competent authority should be in charge of the risk assessment. It means in my country, if we consider that the checkpoint is one of the competent authority, that the checkpoint to monitor or to differentiate the passenger based on the risk. The main problem is the identity, as you mentioned, Sergio, and one of the weaknesses of the API directive is that the airline are not responsible for the quality of the data. And one of the weaknesses of this directive is that we should scan the MRZ zone. That's the only way to control that your data, as you mentioned, 60% of the data are wrong. It means that we need to know that we have certain weaknesses and to ensure that maybe by certain means we can scan the MRZ, we have what we call the AQQ API, Advanced Query, Advanced Passenger Information. We have certain means to ensure that the person is the person he claims to be. The last point, that's the single identity of IATA. My feeling, I'm very much against this concept if the government is not at the, I would say, at the beginning of this process. I was part of an EU project on breeder document. We consider that the passport is more and more secure, but we consider that the breeder document, that's the beginning of the process, is extremely weak. And if we don't have the government to ensure that the identity that you give to an airline on an airport, that the government is responsible, I think that we will never trust this idea. If we can commit a government to be part of your project, because I know that you have this project, and I think that blockchain could be a means to consolidate this information. But to consider that an airline on an airport would give you an identity, my feeling is that that's the wrong way if you don't have the government in advance or somewhere in the process.
Let me quickly just touch your 2 points, starting from the last one. Is in the pilot that we are working, the government is involved, deeply involved. We cannot do anything, even changing a comma in the security processes if the government is not involved in the beginning. So in the few, I will say there are 2 main European countries and 2 main European airports that we are working on. And in both of them, Ministry of Justice, Home Affairs, Border Control, all of them are involved, are engaged. And they are the ones that are more visionary and asking for, help us to help you. So in that sense, the government piece is solved. Regarding the other pieces, I'm giving you my passport information to the airline website. And this passport information is validated, or based on the passport number or the risk assessment done, etc. If there is information on top of my passport number that is wrong, the airline is not aware, because there is no sharing of information. I give you my data, and you do whatever. So we found ourselves that the data is wrong. But again, as you say, it's not our responsibility in that sense. It's the responsibility of the passenger or the authorities, that they also know that this passport contains those data attributes. This passport corresponds to Sergio, not to Brandon. So if I use this passport number and I put Brandon, why? Nobody cares.
Actually, if it's really 30 seconds, no more.
Is on? Yeah. Just a quick intervention. I'm Pascal Janer from the French Imprimerie Nationale. I just want to complete the point because it's an interesting point. One thing is you speak about interoperability, privacy, data exchange, and so on. So the key is biometric because the only part of yourself that you can share and to confirm that it is you, it's your biometrics. And of course, if the biometrics, the weakness is the enrollment, and the enrollment of the biometrics should be done by the state in which you are belonging. If you are Spanish, it should be the Spanish government. If you are Estonian, it should be the Estonian government, and so on, because this is the only way to prove that it is well your identity, and this is the only official authorities enabled to do it. And of course, if there is mistakes in the document, this is another story, and you can, of course, check by automatic kiosk or ABC system. But this is just to confirm on the flow that the data is accurate. But in terms of operability and exchange of information, I think the key issue is biometrics, and the only authorities enabled to put your biometric in a document is your state.
Thank you for the question. Quick answer, yes or no. Do we absolutely need biometrics in order to deliver the same security in an interoperable world? Andres?
You need the biometrics to mint the first physical level of identity, but you can derive other cryptographic identities or something like that from that biometrically secured identity. So yes, in the beginning, the state needs to issue something, but on top of that, you can build things that the airlines or anybody else can trust without necessarily resorting to biometrics.
Brandon?
I agree with Andreas. You need something to bootstrap the process, and then you need to then use that and look at the context in which it's being used, and that actually gives you the overall.
Martin?
Yes.
And Sergio?
Absolutely.
Then perfect. Thank you very much for our panelists. Can I have a big round of applause? It's clearly one topic that we could discuss at least for another hour or so, but without further holding myself from the lunch, I will ask Stefan Brandes to come here and then give us the closing remarks of this conference. Stefan, please. And I believe you, yes, the microphone is there.
Thank you. Yeah, Krum has exhausted his public speaking time for this week. So that's why he asked me to do this. No, actually, he has been called to the office for dealing with some urgent matters. That's the drawback of having this conference just around the corner from your office, so that you can be called. I hope you enjoyed those 2 days as much as I did, and I hope you are taking home as much as I will do from this conference. We have learned yesterday that business should be the driver for the change, but at the same time, business and maybe even legislation will also have to adapt to changing environments there. We have learned today that there is a lot of technology available for us to be used in future projects. We have also learned that there are cases when the views of the industry and of governments or lawmakers on the other side are not completely aligned, or maybe in some cases there are significant differences in views still. So there's a lot of room for further discussion, a lot of room for further conferences here. And what remains now is for those of you who will stay for lunch to wish that you will enjoy it, and for those of you who will have to leave immediately, safe travel, and I hope to see you back here for the next EU-LISA annual conference next year. Thank you very much, and thanks a lot to all the panelists, the moderators, speakers, the organization team, and you, the audience, for your active participation, which made this conference possible. Thank you very much, and see you next time.